Chapter 1257. At this moment, outside the wooden hut, in the middle of the sea of flowers, it wasn't easy to grow the poppies well. The mercenaries would always patrol the area so that the farmers wouldn't dare to have any ulterior motives. Similarly, this area became the most heavily guarded area. Bojo carried her gun and walked past one of the farmers. Her actions were fierce. No one suspected her even when she was near the engine room. But in order to enter the engine room, she had to be able to match the slogan. Bojo walked back and forth. She looked like she was patrolling the perimeter, but in reality, she was listening to the movements there. 3 batches of people had entered the engine room. It was just that these 3 groups of people all had different slogans. Even with her strong memory, it was hard for her to enter such a defense mechanism. Just as Bojo narrowed her eyes, the 4th batch walked over. Bojo arched a brow. She held a cigarette in her right hand and placed her left hand on the shoulder of one of them. "Brother, do you have a lighter?" "Of course." The person swept her a glance. "But why do you look so unfamiliar? When did you come? Are you in charge of the engine room?" Bojo watched his gaze and noticed the suspicion in it. She smiled faintly. "I haven't been here for long. That's why I haven't seen you before." The person lit his lighter and moved it in front of her. Bojo lit the cigarette, but didn't continue to follow him. Instead, she waved her hand. "Thanks. It's okay." The person's suspicions were dispelled when he saw that she wasn't moving forward. He walked towards the engine room. Bojo held the cigarette in her mouth. Her patrolling posture was natural, as though she had indeed been borrowing a lighter. However, only she knew that if she had continued, her identity would have been exposed. Breaking through the defense of the engine room was harder than she had imagined. It seemed like this time, she would have to be more patient and observe. Bojo glanced up and puffed out a string of smoke. She watched the setting sun and listened to the slogan of the 7th batch. A smile appeared on her lips. As expected, after the 3rd slogan, another round. She walked towards the engine room. As the 8th batch, she was stopped by the guards. They glanced at Bojo before replying slogan. Bojo searched through her memories and recited the slogan unhurriedly. The guards looked at each other and stood to the side. Bojo knew her slogan was right. She held the gun in one hand and walked in. The computer room was huge. Once she entered, she could see the security cameras in the corridor. There were a total of 6 of them, and every single one of them was an obstacle to her movements. Therefore, she had to change her identity so that she could come into contact with the mainframe without using force. Yes, there was a change in her plan. After she saw so many cameras made, she wasn't going to destroy the tower again, because there was another way that was safer. Using the computers here to share IP addresses would not be blocked by the signal tower. The shielding equipment was like a protective shield that perfectly covered the area, making it impossible for anyone to find it quickly. But if it was their own network and equipment, it definitely wasn't blocked. Otherwise, how could they communicate normally? Bojo noticed that none of them had a phone. Even the mercenaries didn't have any. Not to mention the gardeners. The only thing that could silently share the address were the 5 computers in the computer room. Bojo glanced sideways at the technician who was making adjustments behind the glass. When one of them left, Bojo waited for him to leave. She followed after him. This scene wasn't wrong even under the surveillance cameras. After all, Bojo looked like she was patrolling. Bojo didn't take action immediately. Instead, she waited until the person entered the toilet. When he wasn't paying attention, she raised her hand and knocked him out. Then she dragged him into one of the compartments. Bojo scrutinized the person's state. She glanced over and reached out to tear his collar. His hair fell down and his back arched. She tugged at his shirt handsomely. With his messy hair, she put on his shirt. When she came out again, she had changed her clothes. She wasn't the same as before. She wore a pair of black-rimmed spectacles and dipped her hair in water, making it look a little oily. She wore a jacket, and when she walked, her posture changed. Her back was hunched, the perfect image of a technical otaku, even a little dispirited. This meant that from the back, no one would know that she had changed into a different person. It was a perfect disguise. However, just as Bojo was about to leave, She noticed a little boy looking at her while washing his hands. The boy was about 11 or 12 years old. His skin was tan due to the intense daily life. Due to the poor environment, he looked very skinny. Especially his arms, he gave off a weak and small vibe. He didn't look dangerous standing there, because there was nothing in his eyes. It was pure black. The moment Bojio walked past him, the boy reached into his pocket in the mirror. It was an action of pulling out a gun. He had already pulled out his gun, the muzzle pointed at her back. Swoosh. The boy didn't seem to expect the other party to be on guard against him. Before he could open fire, his throat was pierced by the military knife that appeared. So much so that he couldn't even say a word. He just widened his eyes and leaned back. Bojio reached out and caught him. She locked the boy, whose body was gradually turning cold, together with the technician from before. At the start, Bojio didn't think about guarding against a child. Even if he were to calculate the time, it was very likely that he would have heard something. But as she approached the boy, a familiar image seemed to spill out of her mind. It was mentioned in the Bible. When your soul left your body, you would remember many things in your life. Those things would be like a movie replayed in your mind. But there were some memories that you would lose. For example, how you left your body, or things that you purposely wanted to blur out. That was why there was a saying, forget about your life so that you can rest in peace. But in that instant there was a replay. Why did she die? It was because of that moment of softness. It was after she had settled a case, walking on the bustling streets of Tokyo. There was a cheerful Christmas atmosphere everywhere. An 11-year-old girl's balloon floated onto a tree. She tugged at her sleeve, asking if she could help her take the balloon down. At that time, Bojio didn't realize that the girl had taken out a gun when she turned around. It was very similar to the scene now. Kwang loved to nurture demons. Bojio wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Because of what she had learned from the Almighty, it was enough for her to observe the danger the child posed. Young children were the scariest when they hurt others. A child that could survive in such a place wasn't simple. Besides, Kwang was here. Bojio raised her hand, wiping the blood off her face. She knew that if it had been someone else, like Prince, he wouldn't have been so ruthless. But she was different. Her heart had long turned black. But sometimes, she would come back empty-handed. Bojio adjusted her jacket. When she walked out of the washroom, her back was hunched, befitting her current identity. There weren't any surveillance cameras in the washroom. Hence, the surveillance room didn't notice anything amiss. Even when Fanjia had taken a glance at the surveillance cameras, she hadn't been able to see through her disguise. But she wasn't Kwang, nor was she Chin Mo. When the images from different locations appeared, she could only tell that something was wrong, like this kind of disguise. Unless she had specially looked for it, it would be hard for anyone to notice anything amiss with just a glance. Besides, Bojio hadn't chosen anyone randomly. After careful observation, she had chosen someone with a figure that was the closest to her. Every technician was focused on their computer screen. Hence, when Bojio sat down, the other four hadn't snapped back to their senses. But Bojio couldn't be too obvious, because there were surveillance cameras here as well. At this moment, inside the wooden hut, the video showed a person struggling in the water. It seemed to be a prank in the school. Prince was still guessing. But the military doctor had already sensed something was amiss. This wasn't a scene from the surveillance cameras. Why had Kwang planted such a scene in the surveillance cameras? Wait a minute. Water. Every time their boss's mood fluctuated, it was related to water. Even they weren't sure what had happened that day. But the person who had planted the hypnosis knew. The military doctor, who was inspecting the other items, wanted to speak but Chin Mo interrupted him. How's the purity? It's very pure, the military doctor replied. Chin Mo chuckled, as though nothing had happened. He used his wine glass to touch Kwang's. Let's have a pleasant cooperation. Let's have a pleasant cooperation. Kwang's gaze dimmed. He seemed to be sizing up the person in front of him. At this moment, the video changed again. It was the scene where the youngster had gone to the infirmary to look for Kwang, who had disguised himself as the school doctor. The scene appeared clearly in front of everyone. In the video, Kwang was very knowledgeable. He had asked the youngster to test the thermometer politely. He seemed to have said something. The youngster didn't seem to be on guard. Then Kuang glanced at the thermometer that the youngster had tested. He stood up and walked towards the water heater. No one knew what medicine he had added. However, when he stood up, even the military advisor had a premonition that once the young man drank this thing, he would definitely be in danger. At that moment, Kuang had already sensed something was wrong with the youngster. Chapter 1258. The military doctor turned towards Qin Mo instinctively when he saw the scene in the video. Recruit number 10 held a special meaning to his boss. The military doctor remembered clearly how many rules his boss had broken in the military just to get closer to the recruit. He had never imagined that he would see such a smile on his boss's face. It was pure and without any impurities. It was because he had thought of that person. But now, the recruit wasn't able to escape. In the video, Kuang had already turned over, passing the medicine to the youngster. The youngster took it. At this moment, the video stopped. Prince's eyes were red, but he couldn't lift his head to show his abnormality. Kuang was in a good mood, pouring himself another glass of wine. Boss Rong, can you guess how I dealt with him in the end? Qin Mo sat there, feeling a chill in his heart. After a certain degree of pain, he would no longer feel it. It was as though a part of his soul had been pulled out. He lifted the corner of his lips. Sir, I really can't guess your methods. After all, in my place, you would just break your limbs. That would be too bloody for a weak doctor like me. I prefer a cleaner method. Kuang swirled his wine glass. Wasn't there a pond in the video? It's in the gymnasium near the school. I tied 2 bricks to his legs and threw him into the water. When he was in the water, he woke up, but he couldn't come up after a long time. He sank to the bottom of the water. Qin Mo listened to the voice beside his ear. The results told him not to believe Kuang's words. But his brain was indeed numb, his body sinking. He didn't dare to think too much because the moment he did, the scene that Kuang had described would appear in his mind. He had dreamed of it countless times, but he didn't want to believe it. The blurry figure was sinking slowly in the water. No matter how he stretched out his hands, he couldn't pull her up. She was too far away. He didn't even have the chance to see her for the last time. Boss, the inspection is done. When the military doctor walked over, he accidentally knocked over the teacup on the table. Gotcha. He was shocked as if he had done something wrong. Boss, I deserve to die. Qin Mo's hand turned cold. His fingertips moved, his gaze changing slightly. You broke Mr. Ka's teacup, not mine. Hearing this, the military doctor turned around and was about to apologize. Kuang raised his hand, a gentle smile on his face. It's just a cup. Boss Rong will come often in the future. This is just a small matter. When Scorpion heard his boss say this, he knew that there was no problem with this deal. The other party's identity had passed his boss inspection. It was indeed so. Kuang glanced at Boss Rong, who was still focused on the transaction. Basically, he denied some of his guesses. The hypnosis had been activated. But this person didn't react. Unless the person in the video wasn't important to him. Or he wasn't Qin Mo. Kuang was leaning towards the second option. After all, that youngster was their trump card against Qin Mo. It was impossible for him not to be important. Although it was a little regretful that he didn't get to see what he wanted to see. However, the other aspects were not bad. For example, there was nothing wrong with this group of people. They could work together now. Kuang glanced up at Fanjia. Understanding, Fanjia walked to the front to check the money. Wang, they only brought half of the deposit. Oh, Kuang replied, turning towards the person beside him. Boss Rong, what do you mean? Sir, you are so guarded against others. I have to hold back. Qin Mo glanced up. You asked us to come to the designated location, but you didn't even let us know the address. Sir, you should be aware that the scariest thing in the underworld is a scam. I'm afraid I might encounter such an incident at night. Moreover, Boss Rong's business has always been like this. The deposit will only be paid after the deal is settled. What he said made sense. Kuang knew that the longer one stayed in the underworld, the more cautious he was. After all, there would be times when he failed miserably. Qin Mo stood up, grabbing his jacket. Since there are no problems with the goods, We can inform the consultant and get him to transfer the other portion of the deposit into your account. Prince spoke up at the right time. Brother, don't worry. I can't get through. I tried, but there isn't any signal here. I'm sorry. Kuang smiled. Second young master must not be used to it. I have no choice. This place is only this big and it's just a business to maintain my livelihood. However, China keeps chasing after me. In order to defend myself, I have to resort to such means. With that, Kuang paused. Fanjia, pass your phone to Boss Rong. Yes. Fanjia reached out, passing her phone over. Since he wasn't the person, there wasn't much to see. Qin Mo didn't move. Prince didn't know what was wrong with his boss, but he knew he had to pick up the phone. They had put in so much effort just for this. He reached out to take the phone, placing it in Qin Mo's palm. Brother, you should contact the family. The consultant won't listen to me. Qin Mo's gaze was deep. Prince couldn't read his emotions, but there was an indescribable danger in his eyes. Contact the family, Qin Mo replied, dialing a string of numbers. Ring ring ring. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be any phones in such an important meeting. But the phone that rang was the one everyone hoped would light up. According to the original plan, Qin Mo would use this number to contact the higher-ups. An unknown number was displayed on the screen. General Qin was in his military uniform. He lifted his finger and pressed the answer button. Hello, is this the consultant? He turned on the hands-free button. Everyone in the conference room was quiet. They were giving General Qin time to communicate with them. At the same time, someone hurriedly made a hand gesture, indicating for them to locate the source of the call. General Qin replied in a low voice, "It's me." His voice seemed to wake Qin Mo up. "There's no problem with the goods, you can transfer the money." "What's the account number?" Everyone knew that these weren't the most important questions. The most important thing was to confirm the exact location of the operation team, through the duration of the call. After all, it usually took a long time to read out the account number. This was Qin Mo's plan from the start. It was to prevent the other party from cutting off all their communication devices, preventing them from tracking their location. Now they finally saw a glimmer of hope. But no one expected that the glimmer of hope would disappear as quickly as it came. Just as Qin Mo read out the two numbers, the signal came from the other side. It was the sound of the phone being hung up. Beep, beep, beep. Damn it. The technical soldier outside the meeting room threw his earpiece away, his hands clenched into fists. Just a little more, and we would have been able to locate the exact location of the call. The leader in the meeting room glanced over. Everyone was concerned about the outcome. How is it? The technical soldier shook his head. The person at the top said, "Continue to lock on." The technical soldier wanted to continue locking onto the target, but he knew very well that it was impossible to lock onto the target without the signal. The other party didn't just hang up, he removed the communication card. Indeed. Kuang reached for the phone when Qin Mo said the second number, smiling. Let Fanjia send the account number. With that, he tossed the phone behind him. Fanjia caught the phone and removed the communication card in it. Hunter and Magician clenched their fists when they saw this. They weren't sure if the time was enough for the troops to locate their exact location. However, this wasn't the only problem Dr. Qin was worried about. The most important thing was Boss. Perhaps Boss didn't realize it himself, but the light in his eyes had started to change. Boss. What was he thinking? Qin Mo wasn't thinking about anything. Images flashed through his mind. Every scene was related to the youngster. In the end, there was the surging water and the wrist he couldn't grab in time. At this moment, the technical soldier outside the meeting room was still trying his best. Just as he was about to tell General Qin that he couldn't locate young master's location, suddenly, a red dot lit up on his local network. It was here. This was the address that young master had just called from. Wait a minute. This was signal transmission? Someone had hacked into the other party's network? How was that possible? Even though he couldn't believe it, it was indeed the address. The technical soldier didn't hesitate. With the red dot's guidance, it was too easy to locate them. In less than a minute, the technical soldier shouted, "General, it's done." The coordinates are 35 degrees north latitude, 47 degrees south latitude. The technical soldier didn't know that he wasn't the only one with a red dot. Everyone who was tracking Qin Mo and young Master Tang had the same result. Fatty and young Master Tang had the same result. In just a short moment, the sea, land and air forces rushed towards the same direction at the fastest speed. In the computer room on the island, Bojiu was still sitting in her seat, a pair of spectacles on her face. On the computer screen, she seemed to be adjusting the local surveillance system. But in reality, under the hidden dialog box, there was a continuous stream of code. She didn't hack into the network. Instead, she opened up the computer room's IP to maximize the sharing. The computer room's IP was shared, but it could only be shared locally. Now she had opened up the network and cracked the password. Then he would create a fake protective cover to stabilize the balance of the regional network. This way, he would be able to transmit the address without anyone noticing. The signal jamming tower was still there. Phones from the outside world couldn't be used here. But there was one thing. They thought it was the safest. In reality, they didn't know that their location had been leaked. Kuang didn't come to the computer room today because he had a business meeting. But very quickly he sent Fanjiao over. At this moment, Bojiu was already repairing the system and erasing the traces, restoring the IP to its original state. Then she stood up, pushed the glasses on her face, and walked towards the bathroom. When she came out again, she was dressed as a mercenary, holding a rifle in one hand. Bojiu hadn't expected to meet Fanjia face to face. Fortunately, her face was black and she had grown a layer of beard. Bojiu didn't dodge. Instead, she walked towards Fanjia as though she was patrolling. Both of them brushed past each other. Suddenly, Fanjia glanced in Bojiu's direction, narrowing her eyes. Wait a minute. Bojiu paused, turning back slowly. She was wondering if her injection was faster, or the big guy beside Fanjia's rifle. Time seemed to have slowed down, stretched out. Fanjia glanced at Bojiu's face asking, "Did you see anyone suspicious?" No. Bojiu released the injection in her pocket. This way, she looked more natural, the tattoo at the corner of her eyes more obvious. Fanjia had more important things to do. She wasn't going to waste her time on a mercenary. She turned, reaching out to push the glass door open. Bojiu stood outside, her voice faintly audible. "Is there anything amiss?" "No." "Where's the person sitting on the second computer?" "She's here. She probably went to the washroom." Fanjia frowned, turning on the computer on the second computer instinctively. Her first reaction was to check if there were any signs of an attack on the regional network, to check if there were any problems with the firewall. She also checked the computer for any abnormalities. After confirming there were no problems, she stood up, her expression unhappy. In the future, no one is allowed to go out alone, not even to the washroom, understand? Yes. After Fanjia heard the answer she wanted, she tested the shielding equipment. It was working normally. At this moment, Fanjia didn't know. What exactly had she missed out? If Kuang had been here, he might have been able to sort out the problem quickly. No matter how smart Fanjia was, she wouldn't have guessed that the computer room seemed normal, but in reality, it had been attacked. And the person who had attacked it. Bojiu walked out of the computer room. She reached out, pulling the mask up to her nose. It was probably because the mercenary's gait exuded a sense of wildness. He held the gun with one hand, his gaze filled with murderous intent. Hence, she didn't suspect his identity. Bojiu walked forward, one hand in her pocket, passing through the flower railings. Her next target was the wooden hut by the river. Bojiu tilted her handsome face. Behind the veil, she couldn't help but smile. "Brother Emo, I'll see you soon." Chapter 1259. But at that moment, Bojiu wasn't aware of what Qin Emo was going through. The fastest reinforcements would need at least 10 minutes to get here. 10 minutes. Qin Emo suppressed the images countless times, but the emptiness in his chest was unbearable. No one noticed that his eyes had darkened. Even Kuang's attention was on Fanjia. "How is it?" "Master, don't worry, the engine room is functioning normally." "That's good." Kuang smiled. continuing to lead them towards the lake. The poppies there were in full bloom, and the latest product was produced. It was a type of candy that was even more addictive than ecstasy. Or rather, it was disguised as a candy. Prince's eyelids twitched when he saw this. Kuwang seemed to enjoy his shock, tearing one of the candies apart. This is the perfect disguise. It will be easier to enter the country. The stationery is still a risk, but these fake candies are different. Besides, in the Chinese market, these are the most popular candies in the nightclubs. However, the checks are too strict and it isn't easy for some people to sell them. It would be best if the Rong family has the channels. At this moment, Prince felt extremely fortunate that they had contacted Kuwang before the drug dealers. He was really vicious. In his mind, there wasn't anything he should or shouldn't do. What would happen if these things entered the supermarket by mistake? Children would definitely eat them. Prince couldn't imagine such a scene. Was Kuwang trying to use drugs to control everyone's lives? Why? Second young master doesn't seem to like such packaging. Kuwang was observant, his eyes dark as he watched Prince's expression. In that instant, almost everyone sensed a message. There was a flaw on their side. Kuwang was suspicious. At the same time, Fanjia, who had hung up, glanced at the number 2 camera. After waiting for a full 3 minutes, she suddenly asked, "When did he go to the toilet?" "It's been about 15 minutes. The technician beside her frowned. "What happened? Why did he take so long?" Fanjia wasn't stupid. Her instincts told her that something must have happened. He turned around and strode in the direction of the bathroom. The mercenaries were the first to enter. When they reached the last cubicle, they turned their heads and said, "There's someone inside." Fanjia narrowed her eyes. "Kick it open." "Yes." The mercenaries were still very destructive. With one kick, the wooden door was kicked open with a bang. There were indeed people inside. However, it was completely different from what they had imagined. A technician who had been knocked unconscious and a boy who had been stabbed in the head with a syringe. It was easy to imagine what this signified. Fanjia didn't hesitate. Her first reaction was to call Kuwang. "Hey." Kuwang's gaze was still on Prince's face, but it was hard to tell. Fanjia's voice was anxious. "Master, the engine room has been tampered with. There's something wrong with the business owner's identity." Kuwang clenched his fists when he heard this. At that moment, no one could tell. He turned his smile even gentler. Dressed in a white coat, he exuded a murderous aura. "I already know, it's not a big problem. I'll come over after the arrangements are made. I still have to discuss the new product with Boss Rong." Fanjia had been by Kuwang's side for a long time. The moment she heard his words, she understood what he meant. The other party was still around. Her master knew about it, but he pretended to be oblivious. He wanted to lead them to a dead end and destroy them all. These people weren't afraid of death. They came in waves. They were smarter than before. So what? All of them would die here. Fanjia hated the fact that she hadn't caught the youngster in the video. If she had, she would have fed her drugs and turned her into a living hell. It was better than letting her disappear. On the other side, Kuwang had already hung up. He glanced up at the group. "Everyone must be hungry after watching for so long. Why don't we eat while looking at the new product, Scorpion?" "Yes." Scorpion didn't know what had happened. Kuwang smiled. "Bring out the feast we usually prepare for our VIPs. Let Boss Rong and the rest have a good taste." Scorpion paused, instantly understanding the meaning behind those words. His eyes turned dangerous as he glanced at Prince and the others, lowering his head and replying, "Yes." When he turned around again, his expression had changed. He made a throat-slitting gesture at the mercenaries who were looking at him. Kuwang continued to lead them forward. Just as Prince and the rest were about to take a step forward, suddenly, their boss lowered the hand holding the cigarette, tapping the side of his thigh lightly. Once, twice, thrice. It was fast and rhythmic. It was a common code used during World War II. There were only 5 words in the translation. Kuwang is going to attack. Be it hunter or wolf, both of them instinctively looked for their weapons in that instant. Kuwang continued. "I admire Boss Rong's courage, but it's a pity. With that, he turned, raising his hand to shoot. Unexpectedly, The person who was originally standing next to him was one step faster than him. His figure flashed, and his leg kicked the gun in his hand away. Kwang's eyes darkened. The mercenaries opened fire in unison. However, these people seemed to be prepared in advance. They slid into the flower field and used the harvester to block their bodies. Prince leaned against the wheel, not having the chance to catch his breath. Boss's voice rang out. Jacket. Prince snapped back to his senses, removing his jacket and tossing it over. Qin Mo and Wolf stood at the same position, pulling the pendants down. The two of them started working. In less than 20 seconds, 2 small guns were produced. Prince was wearing bullets on his wrist. There weren't many, only 10 bullets. They were loaded into the 2 guns. When they had entered, they had gone through a strict inspection. Scorpion was so thorough that he even checked their ears. He hadn't expected them to have guns. Charge, they don't have any weapons. Scorpion lifted the gun in his hand. But the moment he finished speaking, there was a loud bang. The mercenary closest to the harvester fell to the ground, his head blown off. They have a sniper. The mercenaries exchanged glances, wanting to scatter. But a second gunshot rang in the air. Another bullet pierced through his chest. Scorpion couldn't figure out where they had gotten their weapons from, until he saw the black leather jacket. He kicked the wooden bucket beside him. It was filled with poppies. How dare they trick him so brazenly? That second young master didn't like this kind of upstart clothing that was full of metal accessories. Instead, he liked to assemble those accessories together to form a gun. Scorpion hadn't thought of this. Firstly, Prince's image was too deep. Secondly, it was hard to guess Almighty Qin's tricks. That was why Scorpion had made a mistake in his work. He was able to react better. Everything that the other party had done was planned. Even disguising as someone was one of them. Very quickly, Scorpion realized that they weren't the same as the people they had met previously. Ah! Scorpion screamed, aiming his gun at the same spot. Who exactly are you? Qin Mo's gaze darkened. After the bullet brushed past his ear, he seemed to have woken up again. He lifted his head and said, Chinese soldiers. The words were like blood that flowed into his heart. This made Prince stand up abruptly. He caught the gun that Wolf threw over and fired at the mercenary on the right who was trying to approach him. 3 people had already fallen on this side, but the people on the other side were completely unharmed. Kwang watched the scene with a dark expression. Set up the sniper cannon. Yes. Scorpion's eyes flashed. He pushed the person beside him away and placed the long barrel sniper cannon on his shoulder. A shot like that, as long as it hit the harvester, it wouldn't just be the machine that would explode, the people behind would be blown away as well. But right at this moment, suddenly, a loud buzzing sound came from the sky. In that instant, everyone on the ground looked up at the sky. 1, 2, 3, 4. A total of 18 military fighter jets with the red flag on them rushed out of the spreading clouds, appearing in front of them with an unstoppable aura. This time, there was no warning. With the evidence that Qin Mo and his team had gathered, it was enough for them to send their troops across the border. But there was one point. China had to bring Kwang back to decide whether he was dead or alive. If he landed in someone else's hands, no one could be sure if this time would be the same as the previous time. Someone would make use of a deal with the upper class to bring Kwang back. Judging from the events that had happened before, there was a problem with the MT government. That was why Kwang had been so arrogant for so long. The moment he pointed at the military council, it was like a flood. But there wasn't a hint of panic on Kwang's face. They don't dare to move. There are so many bombs buried here. If they throw a bomb, we won't be the only ones dying. Indeed, the military planes couldn't strafe. Scorpion lifted his lips, raising the sniper cannon, and firing at the wings in the sky. Bang! One of the military planes suffered damage, losing its balance. Chapter 1260. Kwang's words caused strategist's heart to skip a beat. He turned back abruptly. Due to his boss's posture, he couldn't see his expression at all. But he felt an inexplicable sense of unease. He couldn't describe the uneasiness he felt. Just his posture was enough to send a chill down strategist's spine. Qin Mo stood there with a gun in his hand, as though the changes around him didn't affect him at all. But Strategist knew something wasn't right. Boss shouldn't be like this. Kwang must have sensed the problem before him. That was indeed the case. The more he looked at Qin Mo, the wider the smile on Kwang's face. It wasn't easy for us to meet, and we have to separate immediately. Actually, I really want to sit down and have a good talk with you about the topic I was talking about. I believe that after today, you will have a different opinion. Kwang glanced at the watch on his wrist. It's about time. Scorpion will stay behind to play with you guys. See you later. With that, he gestured to the mercenaries. Immediately, someone started the speedboat parked on the lake. Everyone on the mission knew they couldn't let Kwang leave this place. Once he entered Country T and was caught, he would be out of China's interrogation range. But the firepower on the ground was too strong, and the military planes couldn't open fire due to the bombs buried in the ground. Once they got close, their wings would be shot off. Almost everyone tightened their grip on this point. Qin Mo still stood there, his eyes reflecting Kwang's back view. The white coat of the doctor overlapped with the image in his memory, causing his gaze to darken. Wolf watched as his boss strolled out. He turned, immediately thinking of a way to cover himself. Qin Mo moved quickly, his entire body exuding a cold aura. Just as the mercenary raised his hand to kill him, a card shot out faster than a bullet. A card that was faster than a bullet burst out in an instant and stabbed straight into his forehead. The card was Qin Mo, but the way he killed him was like magic. Before anyone realized it, their skin had already been scratched by the cards. At this moment, Kwang was preparing to board the boat. He turned back and glanced at the figure following them. He seemed to be in a hurry, but surprisingly, he didn't ask anyone to stop Qin Mo. Instead, it seemed like she was purposely making him follow her. She heard someone calling Boss Qin. Kwang narrowed his eyes. Let Scorpion destroy the harvester first. It's annoying for the people behind. Come on, Qin Mo, wait a little longer. You will be my most successful masterpiece. He believed that at that time. You will be willing to call me teacher. Kwang smiled as he stepped onto the boat. The mercenary stood on the shore. His figure was very familiar. He took the earpiece and said, King wants you to get rid of the special forces on the land first. Scorpion smiled and adjusted the aim of the sniper rifle. I'll take care of it now. On the other side, Prince glanced sideways and sensed the other party's intention. He wanted to push Wolf, who was the closest to him, away. The corner of Scorpion's mouth curled deeper and deeper, his killing intent filling the sky. All of you die. Just as his finger was about to pull the trigger, a voice rang out. Bang! A fierce gunshot rang out from an unknown place. Chapter 1261. D***, there's a sniper. In an instant, all the mercenaries were in chaos. Blood splattered everywhere. Scorpion didn't even know how he died. He was already lying on the ground with his cannon. But that wasn't the end. At the highest point of the flower field, a slender figure was lying on the ground, with a rifle resting on her shoulder. The hair on her forehead fell down, revealing only a pair of eyes. Her breathing was slow, but the speed at which she fired the gun was shockingly fast. She locked onto him accurately. It was a clean shot. Bang! Another gunshot rang out. Before the mercenaries could even react, Xian had already taken out his cannon. The military aircraft in mid-air had already found an opportunity to descend. Prince, who had been prepared to die, widened his eyes. He glanced at his back before glancing up in disbelief. Someone is helping us? Could it be someone from the same industry that Kwang didn't eliminate? That's not possible. Strategist had received the information. According to what he knew, all the spies here had been locked up by Kwang. But how could he explain the two gunshots? Fatty, who had landed with the military aircraft, had had this question when he had received the red dot signal. After hearing the two gunshots, he was even more certain of his suspicions. There was someone else here besides his boss. But who could that person be? Forgive Fatty for his low intellect, he couldn't figure it out. But it was undeniable that the situation had changed because of the sniper's hidden shot. If the first military aircraft could descend, the second one would be able to as well. The mercenaries had started to change their tactics from their frenzied shooting. This was because they knew very well that once these military aircraft were given a chance to land, these Wuxia soldiers would give them a thorough and painful blow. The 2 gunshots were the ones that had caused this opening. The sky was filled with military green, occupying every spot. Prince managed to snatch a gun that belonged to him. His figure was like a dragon as he weaved through the crowd. His combat skills were finally on full display. When he lifted his lids, he glanced towards the flower field. The figure was gone. Where did it go? Prince was still curious about who had saved them. On the other side, Kuang sensed the change in the situation. His eyes dimmed and his fingers tightened. He wasn't as calm as before. Instead, he was furious. Set sail. Yes. The person in charge of the rudder started the ship. 3 mercenaries stood at the bow and were pushing, looking at the speedboat cutting through the water. Kuang slowly released his grip. But before the corners of his mouth curled up, 2 poker cards took the lives of 2 of his men. It was Qin Mo. At this time, he had already wiped off the disguise on his face. Dressed in a black windbreaker, he looked like a demon from hell. Coupled with the flames behind him and the poker cards revolving around his palm, he gave off a dangerous aura that could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. The big mercenary obviously took a step back. The speedboat sped up. Qin Mo stepped on the corpses by the river and leaped onto the front of the boat. Kuang stood at the cabin. When he looked at the hair hanging down his forehead, he smiled deeply. Is it painful? Qin Mo, you are my student. In terms of psychological research, I won't lose to you. So stop struggling. Look at this lake. Isn't it similar to the one you saw previously? Speaking of which, you can't protect the person you like because of your responsibilities. Do you still remember our lesson? Humans are selfish. If you aren't selfish, you won't be able to protect the person you want to protect. In this world, there will always be people who don't follow the bottom line. Do you want to know how I discovered the identity of your little lover? She was probably influenced by you. She actually wanted to save one of my believers. It's a pity. That believer of mine doesn't care about anything as long as she can be noticed. It wasn't easy to choose her. Don't you people in China pay attention to small things? When I found out that she stood on the side of the plagiarist and didn't care about who was the original author, she even posted a long post to prove how smart she was, I locked onto her as my believer. As expected, as long as you give her a chance to stand in front of everyone, she will do anything, including betraying the person who thought she was bullied and wanted to protect her. That person is you, the one who tried so hard to sneak into the school to deal with me. It's a pity. From a certain perspective, I admire her. For example, the way she struggled to survive in the pond. This was a further hint. If Qin Mo was clear-headed, he would definitely know and eliminate it immediately. But now, Qin Mo wasn't clear-headed. In fact, the moment he saw the youngster in the video take the cup of water, his mental defenses were already starting to crumble. But at that moment, there was a belief that supported him. That belief was to complete the mission. Kuang would probably never understand. To a soldier in China, especially to someone like Qin Mo, what did belief mean? It meant that even if the hypnosis was activated, he wouldn't give up. Kuang could see the change in Qin Mo's emotions. The hand hanging by his side clenched tighter. The happier Kuang was. Now the boat was a distance away from the riverbank. He believed that no one would be able to catch up to them. Similarly, he believed Qin Mo wouldn't attack him again. As long as he continued to guide this person who had completely lost his mind, then he would be able to use his sharpness. Kuang had waited for this day for a long time. He couldn't control his excitement at the thought of being able to use Qin Mo. It was obvious from Kuang's state. He tried hard to control his emotions, wanting to slow down his tone so that he could carry out the hypnosis better. Think about it, are those people worth saving? Other than making you lose the most important person in your life, what else did they bring you? Qin Mo, you can totally change your way of living. You are the chosen one. Why did you have to choose such a difficult path? As long as you let go of the unnecessary perseverance in your heart, the person you love won't leave you. I know you want revenge now. Those people who made you lose her, every single one of them is trash. What's wrong with getting rid of these trash? You should kill all of them, isn't that right? Chapter 1262. Her deep voice was like the water in the lake, drowning all of Qin Mo's senses. The speed of her speech, the tone of her voice and the content she was feeding him. Kuang was using a targeted hypnosis. He watched as the tall and straight figure stood in front of him. He paused, reaching out to press down on his head. On the other side, after firing the 2 shots, Bojiu leaped up from the flower field. She realized that Qin Mo had boarded the speedboat. The only way she could catch up to him was to hide her Lamborghini 600 meters away. But it wasn't possible for her to not be discovered. Even when she flew past him. When Prince saw the familiar figure, he couldn't help pausing. Little Black. It's really Little Black. The next second, he saw her clothes and the rifle in her hands. He recalled her previous position. His eyes widened. It's Little Black. The one who helped us just now was Little Black. Doctor saw Bojiu's face. The youngster's face had probably been rubbed against the bushes, her disguise gone. Her cold face looked especially pleasantly surprised at this moment. They hadn't expected it. Bojiu was the one who had been helping them. Fatty was the most shocked among them. He opened his mouth and shouted, "Big Spade!" That explained why he had received the red dot's location. It was because of her. She was actually here. Fatty couldn't tell what he was feeling because he couldn't find a second person who would enter the tiger's den alone to save the boss and turn the situation around with his own strength. This reminded him of the days in Supreme Alliance. He had seen her shoulder the heavy burden and lead Supreme Alliance out of the encirclement. But however, such a person might not be able to return to the esports arena. But even so, she had still appeared here. She could have stayed out of trouble. Both her and their boss. But they had still come to the most dangerous place. Because they had to save these people. Fatty wasn't afraid of anything. He was most afraid of not being able to make it in time. Doctor was the same. Hence, when he saw the youngster's face, his first reaction was to shout towards the lake. "Boss, the most important person to you is still alive." It was useless. The speedboat was already quite far away. Now they could only vaguely see that they had stopped there. As for what exactly happened, no one knew. Swoosh. Bojiu lifted the banana leaf that was blocking the Lamborghini. Voice recognition unlock. The car door opened with a snap. The navigation system began operating. Originally, Little Black wanted to tease its master humorously. "I'm done changing the diving mode, I'll be right back." Entering diving mode. The navigation system fluctuated. "The fuel is not full. Master, please be careful. We might not be able to return." Bojiu reached out to block the water goggles. "Ignore it." Yes. When Little Black heard this, he knew that his master had lost his usual composure. Otherwise, he wouldn't have set off so recklessly without considering the amount of fuel. Not only that, there was also the look on her face when she held the steering wheel and dived into the water. It wasn't like her at all. But it made one's heart ache. Little Black heard her voice. There was a rare sense of urgency. She said, "Brother Mo, wait a little longer. I'll be there soon." Little Black did not understand human emotions. It just knew how to look. If there was a person, he would really like that person too much. His greatest fear would be losing them. On the lake, in the cabin. Kuang took another step forward, his gaze landing on Qin Mo's lifeless eyes. "I have a remote control here. As long as you press the red button, you will be able to eliminate a portion of the people who caused her death. As for the rest, you can take your time to find them." At this moment, Qin Mo seemed to be bewitched, his lifeless eyes looking towards the brightest color. "Come, you are the most qualified person to judge." Kuang was still as refined as ever. After all, the main event was about to begin. As long as he pressed the button, the wooden house not far from the speedboat would be blown away. There were countless bombs buried underneath. The Chinese soldiers who had destroyed his plans, and the people who refused to be captured would be buried along with his flower field. Most importantly, the person who would do it was Qin Mo. Just based on this point, he had already won. Yes, from the start, this was Kuang's plan. He didn't care much about his subordinates. Although it would definitely be a little difficult to find some people who were convenient to use. But Qin Mo was enough to exchange for them. With that thought, Kuang's smile deepened. Qin Mo reached out his hand as though he was being commanded. Just as Kuang thought he was going to press the button, there was a swoosh sound. The remote control was thrown into the water. Qin Mo was still standing at his position. The wind from the river blew against his black trench coat, making him look like a vampire about to explode. There was an indescribable evil smile on his lips, as though he was mocking the world with a hint of bloodlust. Kuang's expression changed instantly, because after looking at Qin Mo, he suddenly remembered an article on psychology. Most people would have a natural sense of submission to their psychological mentor when they triggered a psychological cue. But there was a 0.1% of people who, when their beliefs reached a certain level, wouldn't submit to their psychologist. Instead, they would become more and more. Kuang didn't want to continue thinking. He raised his hand, wanting to shoot Qin Mo. Since he couldn't tame someone, he should be killed right here and now. Qin Mo wouldn't give him the chance. In a flash, the poker card in his hand flew out again. This time it was even more murderous than before. When the poker card brushed past his wrist, Kuang missed his aim in pain. The bullet flew past his side, hitting the mercenary who wanted to stop Qin Mo. Kuang's eyes widened. He knew how powerful Qin Mo was, but he didn't know where his bottom line was. But this time he saw it. At the same time, he also saw the true hell. At this moment, Qin Mo didn't have any reservations. Because he didn't have any reservations, there was only one thought left in his mind. Kill. Kill. Kill them all. Especially this person. Many people had said that young Master Qin's hands looked good when he played games, and would definitely be more beautiful when he played the piano. But they didn't know that Qin Mo's hands were porcelain white and cold. When he picked up the poker card to kill someone, it could be described as breathtaking. As the prey, Kuang's heart had never raced so fast. In that moment his eyes were filled with panic. Even the usual gentleness on his face was gone. He pressed down on his hand, wanting to pick up the gun anxiously. Qin Mo walked in front of him. His eyes were as deep as they had been when they first met. But this time, the flickering light was a little dark. You're right, they all deserve to die. But the one who deserves to die the most is you, Professor. Qin Mo smiled nonchalantly. When he smiled, there were still traces of blood under his eyes. He was incomparably handsome. You seem to have always wanted to control me. Professor, didn't the documents you studied tell you that when things reach an extreme, they will go in the opposite direction? With that, the poker card in Qin Mo's hand was already pressed against Kuang's neck. I do have some regrets, Kuang said. As Kuang spoke, a blade appeared in his palm. Without waiting for Qin Mo to defend himself, he stabbed the blade towards him. Qin Mo dodged, his long leg kicking him to the side, sending him crashing into the cabin. Kuang's eyes wavered. He had realized his end. If it had been the Qin Mo of the past, he wouldn't have been in this state. But Kuang laughed lowly, black veins seeping out of his eyes. Qin Mo, you have already become another me. Do you think you can leave this battle unscathed? Even if I die, you will lose. You are still the same as when you were a professor. You talk too much. Qin Mo laughed as he lifted him up. His eyes were starting to overflow with red. Since you like water so much, we will do it your way. Tie a heavy object and sink. Don't worry, I won't knock you out. Things like drowning should be slowly enjoyed. Panic was evident on Kuang's face. He would rather Qin Mo raise his hand and shoot him. He had never expected Qin Mo to use such a method. He was awake but couldn't save himself. Was he going to let him have a taste of all the suffering that person had gone through? Kuang wanted to resist. But once he lost the psychological battle, he would no longer have any advantage over Qin Mo. In less than 2 seconds, Kuang realized that something had cut his wrist. Anyone with a little experience would know what it would be like to be thrown into the water after cutting one's wrist. The more he struggled, the faster the blood would flow. Moreover, there was a heavy object tied to Kuang's legs. There was a muffled sound of falling into the water. He didn't even have the chance to surface, unless he bent his body and removed the heavy object from his legs. But just like what had been said, the more he moved his hands in the water, the faster the blood would flow. Moreover, The loss of blood left him with no energy to untie the knot. Actually, all high-level psychologists had learned how to untie knots. This time, Kwong couldn't make it. At the start, he was still struggling. When he couldn't breathe, blood started to spread on the surface of the lake. Gradually, his fingers stopped moving, and his whole body sank deeper and deeper. The speedboat had stopped. Chin Emo stood in the cabin, his head throbbing. He took the opportunity to sit down. Blood slowly dyed his eyes. Have you heard of a story? The story went like this. In the Bible, the archangel in charge of the divine world, Michael. He was as noble as snow and had the most beautiful appearance. He was the light of the entire divine world. But no one knew that the archangel had lost all emotions when he was maintaining order in the human world. He sacrificed his flesh and blood to save people time and time again. But when he was attacked by others, he understood that humans were just like that. Because he had seen all the darkness. Regardless of the situation, even if he passed by the shore, his holy battle robe wouldn't be tainted when he was guiding others. Until he met someone. The most rebellious fallen angel, the young Lucifer. Michael's emotions returned. At first, he was impatient. Then he wanted to see that person. After all, from the start, that person had provoked him. At that time, Lucifer's devil consciousness hadn't been activated. When he lay in his arms, he was like an obedient little devil. Michael thought that the two of them would be together for a long time. Until the divine world received a letter from the human world and launched the largest war. His most beloved Lucifer walked out of the raging fire and was burned beyond recognition. From then on, when Michael waved the sword in his hand, there was only coldness. He was in a high position. He killed people like flies. And now Chin Emo was like Michael. Under the dim yellow light. He was half lying in the cabin, as if he didn't care how much blood was on his hands. The setting sun dyed his eyes red. Elegant, mysterious, noble, these words still suited him. But anyone who saw him at this time would know. This wasn't the Chin Emo they knew. Chin Emo tilted his eyes as if he was admiring the approaching night. In this state, he was even more hesitant to move forward like the speedboat with the red flag. At this moment, there were rolling waves. Black bats flew up from the bottom of the lake. A figure jumped onto the speedboat that was stained with blood. People watched from afar. The youngster took off the water shield in front of his forehead. His hair seemed to be dripping water. Major General Chin, who was sitting on the ground, reached out and grabbed his neck. In an instant, almost everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Young Master Tang, who was standing at the front, realized a problem. Chin Mo's hypnosis is complete. The highest order was that once Chin Emo got into an uncontrollable state, they had to bring him back and let the higher-ups make a decision. How exactly should they handle the situation? But now, they didn't dare to go near him. He was too dangerous. Chin Emo watched the youngster in front of him and smiled slowly. That smile was evil and bloodthirsty. A prey that came to your doorstep? Bojo couldn't breathe. Her gaze landed on the pair of completely unfamiliar eyes. Her heart felt as though it was being cut by a knife, but she was smiling. She found it hard to speak. Brother Emo, it's fine that you forgot about me when I was young, but how can you forget about me now that I've grown up? Brother Emo? Chin Emo inched closer to the youngster's face. How can I have such a short brother that can't even lie? In reality, Chin Emo couldn't understand why he released his grip instinctively when he felt a little uncomfortable. It was as though he was possessed. Forget it. The youngster couldn't do anything to him. Anyway, if he dared to move, he could use the poker card to slit his throat. But Chin Emo didn't expect that. The moment he released him, the youngster hugged himself. His voice was slightly hoarse. Brother Emo, this time, it's my turn to bring you home. Chapter 1263. Go home. Chin Emo glanced at the person hugging him, reaching out to lift the youngster's chin. This person was really interesting. Didn't he see the blood on his hands? Still, he didn't see the person who was no longer breathing. There was so much blood. It was obvious he was the killer. The speedboat on the lake. No one dared to approach him. But this youngster came over as though he wasn't afraid of death. What exactly was he trying to do? Chin Emo scanned her face before speaking slowly. The people behind you don't seem to have any intention of bringing me home. At this moment, Bojio remained neutral. I'm not on the same side as them, I'm in the underworld. Chinmo's side profile didn't reveal any emotions. Especially now, he was smiling, the cards in his hands never leaving. It was obvious he didn't believe her. You called me brother just now, are you my younger brother? No. He thought the youngster would admit it. After all, it would lower his mental defenses. Chinmo didn't expect to hear a negative answer. His brows were about to arch. The young man leaned forward, and those light-colored lips touched his lips. Chinmo stilled. He could feel the breath on the youngster's body and the slightly chilly softness. There was a tinge of candy, spreading from his lips. It was so warm that he didn't push the youngster away immediately. Then, he heard the youngster's voice again. I'm your sugar daddy, we're a couple. Chinmo paused for a moment. Her gaze landed on the young man's slightly upturned lips, and she reached out to press his head down. She tilted her body slightly, and her breath blew into the young man's ear. You mean, not only did I fall in love with a boy, but I'm also being kept by this boy? Brother Emo, Bojio smiled, not denying his words. Instead, she held on to his hand and moved it towards her chest. The softness on his palm made Chinmo's fingers pause, his brows furrowing slightly. A girl? She was so thick-skinned? But the youngster was like a little gangster, completely unaware of her thick skin. She inched closer to the tip of his nose. Your favorite feeling? Interesting. The more Chinmo looked at him, the more interesting he found him. He lifted his eyebrows slowly. Indeed, I don't like those that are too big. Other than being small, you don't have any other good points. Bojio. Why didn't the Almighty forget his venomous tongue, even after turning dark? However, when it comes to inspecting goods, I still need to do this to know if it's to my liking. Chinmo reached out and pulled Bojio into his arms. Under the cover of the black trench coat, his hand had already reached under her clothes. It was hard not to like her waistline. It was smooth porcelain white and delicate, just like a piece of top-grade jade. The moment they touched, Chinmo fell in love with the feeling. His eyes darkened as if he hated the influence this person had on him. Without changing his expression, he reached out and pushed the young man to a safe place. What is it? Bojio blushed. Her ears were burning from the kiss. When Chinmo saw this, he smiled, his eyes filled with danger. Since you are my sugar daddy, shouldn't you be the one to distract the speedboats on the lake? Bojio sensed his resistance towards the military uniform. And in those deep eyes, there was a vicious aura that constantly floated out. It was a completely different emotion. But even so, he was still him. What is it? Chinmo tucked her hair behind her ear and smiled slowly. You don't agree? You said we are lovers, but you can't even do this? Bojio looked at him, her eyes clear and intelligent. If that's what you want, I can do it. With that, she turned. She met the eyes of the person standing at the front of the boat without giving any orders. Before Bojio could speak, a voice came from the other side. Chinmo has to go back with us. Someone will handle the rest. This was a direct rejection of everything Bojio wanted to say. Since that was the case, young Master Tang, you should know that I won't hand him over to the military in his current state. Bojio knew that even if she returned with them, the Almighty would receive proper arrangements. But psychologically, or perhaps, the outcome would be the same as before. Chinmo wasn't suited to have a military rank anymore. Out of consideration for everyone's safety, they would allow him to return to Jiang City. He had done so many things. He didn't hesitate to give up his favorite esports. He allowed himself to fall into such a predicament once again. In the end, he could only receive such treatment, because he was no longer the Chinmo of the past. The military wasn't wrong. He was too dangerous now. If Kuang could hypnotize someone in a short period of time, but now, he had all the abilities to control people's hearts. Anti-reconnaissance, combat ability, long-range sniping, even the basic reactions of his body. He was incomparably familiar with the military's tactics. Once he turned dark, the military would definitely be wary of him. Other than herself, Bojio didn't trust anyone else. She was afraid. Afraid that they would treat him as a psychopath like Kuang, and raise him in a place where he wouldn't have to worry about food or clothing, but wouldn't be able to escape. That wasn't her pet. Her pet had been a little prince since he was young. Arrogant, disdainful and righteous. He was the most suitable person to be a god. He should have been spotless. How could she allow them to treat him like a virus and isolate him? Regardless of the method, I want to bring him away. Boju looked at the figure and smiled slowly. If we can't resolve this peacefully, I have other methods. I believe young Master Tang wouldn't want to be my enemy. The figure didn't move, his tone calm. Z, have you ever thought about the consequences of bringing him away? The military will put you on the wanted list, but that isn't important. More importantly, are you sure he doesn't have any ulterior motives? You should be aware of the danger he is in now. Perhaps, the moment you bring him away, he will control you to do whatever he wants. Qin Mo smiled. He hadn't expected such a smart person to be in front of him. It seemed like his plan wasn't going to succeed. I can bear any consequences. I've said it before, this time, it's my turn to bring him home. Qin Mo trembled when he heard this. He looked at the youngster very slowly. There were other thoughts in his bottomless eyes. This meant that this youngster had known about his plan. That was why she had said, "If that's what you want, you can have it." She had clearly sensed that he was up to no good. She had to agree to his request. Chapter 1264. Bojo didn't notice the change in the gaze of the person beside her. Even Qin Mo didn't notice the coldness in his eyes. There was a tinge of interest and gentleness in them. The rays of the evening sun shone into the deep lake. It was deep and unfathomable. Besides young Master Tang, there was someone else in charge. His stance was firm. Qin Mo must be brought back. Young Master Tang remained silent. Boju laughed, blowing her hair into the air. There was a hint of mischief in her voice. Then we can only fall out. Who is he? How dare he speak to me in such a tone? Young Master Tang glanced at the person beside him, smiled and took a step back. What he meant was, since you want to interfere, then you can. Of course, Bojo noticed his actions. As long as he didn't stop her from bringing Qin Mo away, there was still a chance. It was obvious that the commander beside young Master Tang didn't know who he was dealing with. He was about to warn him again when the youngster in the middle of the speedboat suddenly shouted, "Little Blackie!" Whoosh! The ripples on the surface of the lake made it impossible for people to see what was happening in front of them. Qin Mo raised his eyebrows, but before he could do anything, the youngster had already grabbed his wrist. With the other hand, he slid open the silver electronic lighter. With a smile on his face, he threw it towards the speedboat's fuel tank. Then she pulled him and charged towards the other side. There was a loud bang. The back of the speedboat burst into flames. Sparks filled the sky. In an instant, the surrounding speedboats couldn't get close. It was a beautiful scene. The setting sun mixed with red. As expected of Z, it was a beautiful escape technique. If it had been by her side, Qin Mo might have been able to control himself. Young Master Tang pushed his spectacles up the bridge of his nose and turned towards the confused commander. He said nonchalantly, "It seems like we won't be able to bring Qin Mo back. Is that youngster crazy?" The commander grabbed his hair. "He actually used such a method. Why are you so calm? We need to report to the higher-ups." Young Master Tang chuckled. "I don't really care about the explanation. He has been rescued and Kuang isn't in anyone's hands. As for the rest, I'll have to trouble the commander to write a report." The commander was shocked. "Wait a minute. Why am I the one writing the report?" This question. Young Master Tang reached out and patted his shoulder. "Commander, you can think about it." The more the commander thought about it, the more depressed he became. It's all that kid's fault. Does he know how many dangerous people he took away? It's a pity. If it weren't for the kid you mentioned, it would have been very difficult for us to find the exact location of this place. Young Master Tang turned around, his eyes indifferent. But it was obvious that there was already a chill inside. The commander opened his mouth, but no words came out. Firstly, that kind of gaze was too horrifying. Secondly, he had never expected the other party to be an important helper in their breakthrough to Kuang. The raging fire on the lake had already melted into the setting sun. Water was her natural enemy. She wasn't a good swimmer, and she couldn't breathe. Before she reached the surface of the Lamborghini, her hands started to lose strength. But before she could slide down, someone grabbed her left hand and lifted her up forcefully. The next moment, cold lips and the smell of tobacco seeped into her nose. Bojio's eyes flickered. Just when she realized what he had done to her, Chinemo let go of her hand. Little Blackie activated his diving mode and sighed. Little Black started diving and sighed. Master, it was really dangerous. I thought you were going to die. I didn't even feel your body temperature just now. Bojio panted heavily, tilting her head to look at Chinemo, who was also drenched. His thin lips were wet, and he was overly handsome. In addition, there was a faint smile on his lips. Bojio caressed the bridge of her nose. Actually, she could have used a little more air. She wouldn't have minded. As though he had seen through her thoughts. His handsome face inched closer, smiling like a devil. You seem to want more? Before Bojio could reply, Little Blackie exclaimed when he recognized Chinmo's voice. Devil? Devil? Chinemo arched a brow at the rearview mirror. Are you calling me? Little Blackie trembled under his gaze. This devil wasn't even suppressing his nature in front of his master. Scary, it was too scary. He didn't reply and turned off the voice system. A car that can change forms and can even talk. Chinemo laughed, his fingers touching her face. Seems like my sugar daddy has an extraordinary background. Bojio tilted her head and looked at his fingers. There were small scars on them, probably because he had used poker cards to kill people. Similarly, Bojio knew that he still had half a deck of poker cards in his hands. This meant that he didn't trust her. But that wasn't important right now. Bojio opened the hidden compartment in the middle of the car. Inside were all sorts of medicine that she had gotten from the Mongolian doctor. Other than the bandages, nothing else was suitable. Bojio tore open a bag with her teeth and pulled Chinmo's hand down. She lowered her lids and stuck the bandages on it carefully as though she was handling a treasure. Your hand is very important to you, it can't be injured. Bojio tore another bag of bandages as she spoke. From the looks of it, she was probably going to stick all the scars on his fingers. From the start, Chinemo didn't move. He just watched the top of her head. His other hand, which was about to be lifted, lowered slightly. Chinemo told himself. He wouldn't kill her. It wasn't necessary. Besides, it was rare to see such an idiot. He was curious to see how far she would go with him. Lovers. Chinemo smiled, but there wasn't any warmth in his eyes. Love was of no use to him. So my sugar daddy, where are you bringing me to? Chinemo didn't believe that he was a sugar daddy. She wasn't good at lying. How exactly did she survive until now? Bojio paused, glancing up and smiling. Jiang City. That was right. He had to go back no matter what. The Asian Cup was still waiting for him. Besides, a familiar environment would help him recover his memory. It didn't matter where Chinemo went. But he wasn't sure if he would get rid of the youngster midway when he lost interest. But one thing was for sure. He was now very interested in her various reactions. I'll listen to you. Let's go to Jiang City. Chinemo lifted her hand, bringing it to his lips. It was a light kiss. There wasn't any warmth. Instead, it felt cold with water. Chapter 1265. Everyone in the operation team couldn't accept the fact that their boss had disappeared just like that. The fire on the surface of the lake was gone, leaving only the remains of the speedboat. No one knew where Chinemo and Bojio had gone to. The scene they had seen was a sea of fire. The commanding officer had sent people to search, but they hadn't found anything. It was as if the two of them had disappeared into thin air. They were on the plane. The commanding officer told Wolf and the others. Chinmo's mental state is extremely dangerous. Based on the bigger picture, from today onwards, Chinemo will no longer be the general of our army. He won't be participating in any operations. Once he contacts you, remember not to reveal any internal information, and inform the higher-ups immediately. Prince sat there in a daze. How did things turn out this way? If it hadn't been for his boss, this mission wouldn't have been completed. However, The result was that the boss had been defeated. Not only had he been fired, but he had also been treated as a dangerous person? Why? For the first time as a soldier, Prince didn't say anything. The commander also knew that it would be difficult for the people sitting here to accept it for a while, so he explained the reason to them. He has received a very serious psychological suggestion. He is now completely different from before. The behavior he is displaying is very dangerous. If you have any news, you can send him to a specialized treatment place to undergo a new psychological construction. He is the best psychologist in our country, the military doctor said. General, who do you intend to get to help him with his psychological treatment? The commanding officer paused. If we can't do it domestically, we can do it overseas. I understand. The military doctor smiled. There wasn't a hint of warmth on his face. The commanding officer could sense the rebellious attitude of his soldiers. After all, they weren't his soldiers and they had just made a contribution. It wouldn't be good for him to discipline them. It would be better to leave it to General Qin. In reality, the commanding officer didn't understand. This time, it was useless to leave it to anyone. The military doctor, hunter, wolf, magician, and Fatty were all people who had been through it once. Now it was the second time. Fortunately, when their boss had woken up, he had only lost a portion of his memory. He hadn't been mentally stable, but it hadn't been like this time. It's good that he left. The military doctor suddenly spoke after a moment of silence. If our boss is with that person, it would be much better than him being sent to a treatment center. A person like boss. How could he let those treatment centers restrain him and strip away his noble and proud character? That was what was really good for him. Prince knew that it wasn't a problem for the military to make such a decision based on the bigger picture. However, he still couldn't control his heart. He rubbed his head with all his might and buried his face in his hands. He finally understood why these people liked to follow the devil so much. A few times, if it wasn't for boss's presence, they had been exposed long ago. No matter what that person encountered, he still wanted to complete the mission. However, he had saved so many people, but no one knew. In the end, he was even abandoned. At the thought of this, Prince ruffled his hair a few more times. Even if boss contacts me, I won't tell anyone his location. Fatty opened his mouth and said loudly, as long as he doesn't kill anyone, no matter what he becomes, he will always be my captain. He will always be you. Of course, the commander heard this. He frowned and turned around, wanting to pay attention to his own words. The others were also looking at him, their eyes filled with stubbornness and determination. The commander had no choice but to submit a written report to the higher-ups. The plane flew higher and higher. Everyone who was rescued was properly placed in the cabin. The signal shielding tower was broken in the middle. As for the flower fields, they were burnt to a crisp. Kuang's forces had disappeared and he had sunk to the bottom of the lake. When the local farmers heard the news, they were filled with an indescribable joy. No one was willing to plant such things, and no one wanted their child to be raised as a devil. The value of this operation couldn't be measured. It was so significant that it could reduce 80% of the drug trade at the border of China. Within 3 years, no one would dare to offend the border. They weren't just saving people, they were raising the prestige of the country. However, there was a small mistake at the end of the operation. During the firefight, Fan Jia hadn't appeared because she was at the engine room. When she saw the military plane appear in the sky, she knew it was a huge crisis. Hence she didn't appear. She changed into a farmer's uniform and returned to the village with a group of locals. When she saw the large number of planes leaving, her lowered eyes were filled with venom. It was that person who had spoiled their plan again. Fan Jia hadn't expected Z to be that person. Everything was clear now. She was like a ghost that wouldn't go away. She would be able to find them no matter where they went. She was just one step away. Qin Emo would have been on their side completely. Fan Jia knew the hypnosis was completed. If she had dragged on for another 10 minutes, Qin Emo would have been used by her master. By then they would be together. In order to keep Qin Emo, her master would definitely make her pretend to be his girlfriend, just like in the past. But all of this had been destroyed by that person. But it didn't matter. The day before, when her master had this plan, He had already told her the code. As long as she found them there, she would be able to snatch Qin Emo back. After the hypnosis was activated, would Z still think that he would be the same as before? In this world, she was the only one who knew what that person wanted the most right now. Report. Speak. We haven't found a person called Fanjia. Young Master Tang sat in the jeep. He paused while he was adjusting his sleeves, his gaze dimming. Tell Z that the person who impersonated her has escaped. Yes. A gust of wind blew. The sky was dyed black. She tried to send a message but realized that the communication signal had been cut. Fanjia didn't catch it. This was a mistake in the mission. Although this person was far from Kuang. But the more she was like this, the more careful she had to be. She was Kuang's student and to a certain extent, she definitely knew psychology. Her abilities might not be outstanding, but there were many times when the thoughts in the dark were more difficult to deal with. There were too many people who used love as an excuse to harm others. They hid behind the internet and became thieves. There were too many of such people. There were so many that Fanjia could make use of them. Otherwise, the incident in Jiang City wouldn't have happened. Not being able to contact Z was indeed troublesome. From his perspective, the scene just now was just a case of a cicada escaping its shell. That was indeed the case. However, Bojo met with a small problem. Even though the scene of you being intimate is beautiful, I have to remind you that there's only 5% of the fuel left. Little Blackie felt that it was too hard for him to be a car. Because the moment he said that, the devil turned towards him. His gaze seemed to be saying that he was redundant. His gaze seemed to be saying that he was redundant. Little Blackie shook his rearview mirror. Didn't his master realize that the devil's presence was stronger than before? Especially that seemingly non-existent evil aura. After Bojo helped Qin Emo bandage his finger, she placed one hand on the seat and moved to the front. The fuel indicator kept flashing, and the smart screen started to become unstable. She moved her finger a few times on it. How long can it last? 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, I will become a pile of scrap metal. Little Blackie felt that life was hopeless. He was afraid that he would be the first sports car to drown. 20 minutes wasn't enough to reach anywhere. Since she couldn't leave, she might as well find the nearest place to rest. Bojo's thoughts changed. She switched from automatic mode to manual mode and rushed towards the shore. Prepare to change form. Land form is in place. There was a loud splash. The moment the water bird soared into the sky, the black Lamborghini jumped out of its slumber. The water flowed over the glass, and the sound of splashing water made the surroundings livelier. But Bojo didn't stop. This was mostly an uninhabited area. But if she remembered correctly, there was a transfer station not far in the middle. It used to be used by the military, and had long been abandoned. She could go there to get some fuel. Activate navigation. Bojo turned the back of the car as she spoke. Her actions were very suave. The car was fast but stable. Moreover, the temperature in the car was moderate. Qin Emo sat in the back seat, deep in thought. His eyes darkened with the night sky. The water on his body hadn't dried yet. His lips were burning. Qin Emo frowned. He probably knew what was wrong with him. Actually, his body temperature had been high from the start. But he had been in the water, and he couldn't show any weakness at this moment. Even if he was an idiot. But no one really knew what she was thinking. Qin Emo closed his eyes, intending to take a break. He didn't expect the person who was driving to stop the car. His body was half suspended, and he reached out a hand to place his palm on Qin Mo's forehead. It wasn't an illusion. You have a fever. The coldness on his forehead made Qin Emo feel much better, but he didn't admit it. Instead, he smiled. It's just that my body temperature is slightly high. Bojo looked into his eyes. She leaned forward and tore his clothes. Qin Emo arched a brow. I didn't expect my sugar daddy to be so proactive. Bojo didn't reply. She tore his shirt and threw it out of the car window. There wasn't anyone here anyway. Without his shirt to cover him, Qin Mo's entire body was exuding a devilish aura. Do you need my help? Qin Emo held her hand. Bojo glanced down. I don't really need it, I just removed my clothes. That's a pity, I thought you would do something to me. Chin Mo noticed that this guy seemed to be in a bad mood. He didn't know why his chest felt a little tight. His body temperature must have been too high, affecting his bodily functions. While thinking like this, the young man leaned forward and kissed the corner of his eye. He suddenly smiled. When you're better, I'll do something to you. Chin Mo paused. This guy was indeed an idiot. His fingers changed and he wrapped them around her waist, burying his face into the other party's slender neck. His voice was still indifferent. I do have a headache, so I'll have to trouble my sugar daddy. All right. Bojo reached out and hugged him back. In that instant, Chin Mo seemed to see a tail wagging behind this guy, the kind with 2 ears on his head. Surprisingly, it made people want to laugh. It was probably because the young man smelled good. Gradually, Chin Mo's eyelids closed and he sank into darkness. But even so, he did not let go of the poker cards in his hand. Bojo glanced at the back seat. The car sped up again. It was normal for him to distrust her. After losing their memories, everyone would immediately believe the words of others. Not to mention someone like the Almighty. Nothing was more important than him being by her side. Bojo swept a glance at the building outside. The building was well hidden. If it hadn't been for the special navigation system in the little black car, they wouldn't have been able to find such a place. After all, it was a military important place. Even if it was abandoned in the past, it would still be dangerous. It was a lawless area, and they were most afraid of encountering other factions. Bojo was very careful. If it was her alone, she wouldn't be like this. But now that she had the Almighty with her, she had to drive to a place with some living conditions. Master, I can only last until here. Little Blackie's voice had never been this heavy. It was obvious that he couldn't keep up. Bojo patted the steering wheel and opened the car door. She walked in the darkness, her footsteps silent. In her hands were the poker cards she had taken from Chin Mo. Master, I can only last until here. Little Blackie's voice had never been this heavy. It was obvious that he couldn't keep up with the speed. Bojo patted the steering wheel and opened the car door. She walked in the darkness, her footsteps silent. In her hands were the poker cards she had taken from Chin Mo. It wasn't impossible. Many local forces would look for abandoned military bases. Fortunately, there wasn't anyone here. It was probably because of the low temperature. After observing for 5 minutes, Bojo lost her senses from the cold. After confirming it was safe, Bojo held onto the tree branch with one hand and jumped down. It was a military important place in the past, so it was easy to find fuel. There were a lot of abandoned military vehicles there. Bojo slid down and checked the fuel tank. Then she took something over to make it easier for her to collect the fuel. She then thought of a way to open the fuel tank. There wasn't any other danger. It was just too cold. Bojo started shivering when she got the fuel. When she reached the Lamborghini, her lips turned pale. Fortunately, there was a heater in the car. Once the fuel tank was full, the smart system automatically adjusted the temperature to the highest. At this moment, Bojo felt her fingers go numb. She shook them and felt better. She wanted to test the Almighty's temperature again. Chapter 1266. In the meantime, Bojo connected to the internet. First, she used the navigation system to search for news in the country. Fortunately, it was a confidential mission. Hence, the Almighty's situation wasn't reported. Even the details of the mission were still classified as an S-grade secret. No one knew what had happened. But deep down, Bojo knew that the Almighty's family was different. With his current predicament, his family would definitely receive news. Many people assumed that. Once Chin Mo received news, he would definitely contact the operation team. They hadn't expected this. The first person to receive Chin Mo's message was Movie Queenan. The call was from Bojo. It was snowing heavily overseas. When Movie Queenan received the call, she was on her way to the airport. Her assistant was worried that she would be cold, so she hurriedly placed a coat over her. Everyone knew that Movie Queenan wasn't in her best condition that day. Hence, she hadn't been filming. They also knew that she had booked a plane ticket to fly back to China. Something seemed to have happened at home. It wasn't an exaggeration to describe Movie Queen Anne's current state. Her assistant had never seen this aristocratic young lady before. When had she ever been so upset? Even her eyes were red. Hello. Bo Gio could tell that she had been crying. She paused before saying, Auntie, it's me, Gio. Brother Mo is with me now. When Movie Queen heard this, she stopped abruptly, her eyes bursting with joy. She couldn't help but cover her mouth. That's good, that's good. She couldn't stop saying those 3 words. Her raven-black hair slid down her cheeks like silk, blocking her tears. Bo Gio was a little clumsy in front of an elder. Don't worry, I'll take good care of Brother Mo. I know, Gio, thank you. Movie Queen controlled her emotions, sniffling. At this moment, she was like a young lady again. I've always been at ease leaving my cold little fellow in your hands. But tell me the truth, is he not in a good condition? A little. Bo Gio took a moment before deciding to be honest. He lost his memory. Movie Queen was on the verge of collapsing. But she knew that from the moment her son had decided to carry out this mission, she knew what the consequences would be. Because of this, she hadn't picked up Mr. Chen's calls for many days. She knew the Chen family's burden. But she still felt sorry for her son. When he was young, her son was smarter than her. She even felt that he did not need her company at all. Because the Chen family's education seemed to be like this. But his son was very sensible. No matter how cold his personality was, he did not show any weakness when it came to protecting her. He remembered that he was only 5 years old at that time. She went to a dinner party and someone tried to force her to drink. At that time, Mr. Chen was not there. His small body stood in front of her like a little prince. Sir, my mother doesn't drink. Besides, hasn't anyone taught you how to treat a lady? He spoke in English and didn't make a fuss. With just a pair of eyes, he made a foreigner lose face. But she spent very little time with him. Mr. Chen arranged a lot of classes for him every day. His emotions were getting weaker and weaker, and he didn't even like to talk much. By the time she realized it and wanted to make up for it, it was already too late. Just like 3 years ago, she watched as he carried out a mission. Ever since then, he found it hard to fall asleep. It was as if a part of his heart had died along with that mission. Until Gio appeared. Even though Movie Queen didn't come into contact with military matters, she knew the reason for her son's departure. Because his mental state was no longer suitable to stay in the military. She had heard everything that Mr. Chen had said in the study room. Her son had been hypnotized. Once it was touched, he would turn into another person. This person would definitely be extremely dangerous and become the most difficult criminal to deal with. Hence, he was no longer suitable to stay in the military. At that time, Movie Queen's heart had really ached. As a mother, what exactly was wrong with her son? He had risked his life and ended up like this. She had expected this outcome when she went overseas this time. She had been afraid that no one would dare to approach him. Fortunately, Gio was there. Movie Queen held onto the escalator and inhaled deeply. But she still couldn't make a sound. In the end, she steadied her breath and said, Even if you are a boy, Gio, you have to stay by his side because you are the only one he has. That was a mother's request from the bottom of her heart. But Bo Gio's hand paused. She had assumed that Movie Queen would have found out about her identity. Now that she thought about it, it might have been because of the filming. She had seen Movie Queen state during filming. She wouldn't pick up any calls and would only head back to the family's house. Most of the time, she would go to get her clothes. Besides, the news within the country wouldn't be immediately synchronized with the international news. Besides, she wasn't a big shot. Bo Gio replied guiltily, Actually, there is something that I have always wanted to tell Auntie. You don't have to tell me, Auntie knows everything. Movie Queen smiled and wiped her tears. Auntie knows that you have always liked each other. Sister, he and I have already discussed it. Once you enter university, the two of you will head to Switzerland to register your marriage. As for the child, you can get a surrogate. If you don't want a surrogate, you can adopt the child. But now Mo has lost his memory. At the end, Movie Queen's mood dropped. Bo Gio arched a brow. You discussed it with my mom? She agreed. Sister, he didn't agree at the start. Movie Queen acted like a child and started to take credit. After that, I recommended many movies and novels to her and introduced her to a few successful people in your circle. She started to understand and accept it. To be honest, I couldn't accept it at the start as well. It isn't because you aren't good, it's because this path is too difficult for you. But after some thought, what's so difficult about it? There are many outstanding people overseas like you. My little ice doesn't seem to dote on you, but I know that only you can make him smile. No one else can. You don't have to worry about the future. Since Mo isn't in politics, I haven't wanted him to stay in the Qin family for a long time. Coincidentally, he will take my surname and you don't have to worry about his father. If he dares to object, I will prepare the divorce papers tomorrow. Adjutant Zhang listened to his wife's words and said quietly, "The chief won't agree." "I don't care if he agrees." Movie Queen and exuded an elegant beauty even when she was angry. Bojiu listened. She knew that Movie Queen and was suppressing her anger. She couldn't possibly cause the Almighty's mother to divorce his father. "Auntie Anne, listen to me." Bojiu coughed lightly. "When I was young, my mother fought for a better life for me so that I wouldn't be bullied by that mistress. I was raised as a boy from a young age, from my actions to the way I dress. In reality, I'm a girl." Movie Queen instilled. Her beautiful eyes widened in disbelief. "W girl?" Bojo braced herself and replied, "Yes. That. It was rare for Movie Queen and to be at a loss. "My little ice," Bojo coughed again. "Brother Mo already knew." "You said he already knew." Movie Queen Anne's beautiful eyes widened. "He never told me about it. He even hinted that your relationship would be difficult. He said that if I liked you, I should settle down with you as soon as possible. That way, I wouldn't have to ask Sister He for your hand in marriage when you found a girlfriend. This kid is really..." Even though he was her biological son, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But the only person who could make her son so childish, to the point of resorting to such underhanded methods, was this kid. "No, I was planning to let both of you wear suits on your wedding day. Hence, I sent the measurements over. Now, I'm going to change it into a wedding gown. Yes, change it into a wedding gown. I'll contact Robert later. Gio, what kind of wedding gown do you like? Is it Chinese or Western?" Bojo hadn't expected the topic to develop in this direction. However, she had never been a shy person. "Anything is fine. Once Brother Mo and I return and after the Asian Cup, we'll get married." Movie Queen Anne smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. All right. She was clear that no one would marry a dangerous person who had lost her memory without hesitation. Except for Gio. Perhaps she understood why her little ice was so fixated on Gio. She had never been liked like this before. Anyone would have softened their heart. They would never accept another person. But the fact that Gio was a girl made Movie Queen Anne overjoyed, her face filled with excitement. She didn't want to return to the country and immediately called the designer. Deputy Zhang was still thinking about how to explain to his boss. On the other hand, it wasn't easy to find an inn in the MT area since it was such a place. Fortunately, Bojo was lucky and she could speak the local language, so she managed to find a small inn. But there weren't any good accommodations here. There definitely weren't any double standards. The hot water wasn't too hot and the bed was extremely narrow, but it was enough for 2 people. Other than a wooden chair, there weren't any other facilities in the room. Qin Mo woke up in the middle, turning his head to look, his arm resting on someone's shoulder. She continued, "You probably haven't stayed in such a place before, but it's good that the bed is small, you can hug it to sleep." Her intentions were too obvious. She was still acting like a sugar daddy. How could there be such a sugar daddy in this world? Even Qin Mo didn't notice the smile on his face. Then he shut his eyes, his entire body turning cold. It was probably because of the nap in the car. His stamina was starting to recover. Bojiu watched the person sitting on the chair, heading down to get a pot of hot water before pouring it into a cup, using a cotton swab to moisten Qin Mo's lips. Qin Mo knew what she was doing, but he didn't know how far she would go. She didn't even touch his lips 3 times. Her voice rang in his ears again. "It's too troublesome, we've already kissed many times." Qin Mo listened without a change in expression. Before he could react, a softness was imprinted on his lips. It was still as fragrant as ever. Even the water that entered his mouth was slightly sweet. Chinemo frowned, but in the end he didn't push the person who was obviously taking advantage of him away. Isn't one mouthful too little? Bojo bent her back, her expression serious. Then she lowered her head. Just like that, Chinemo was kissed 3 times. On the 4th time, Bojo realized a problem, deciding to remove his pants as well. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to get on the bed. But she leaned over. The moment she moved her belt, her eyes opened slowly. That pair of closed eyes slowly opened. They were very deep, and even his voice was a little hoarse. What do you want to do to me? MH. Before Bojo could reply, Chinemo flipped his hand. Chinemo flipped his hand and pinned her onto the floor with his bare upper body. His breath was hot. Your clothes are wetter than mine. Do you want me to help you take them off? Chinmo's left hand had already reached into her shirt, touching the skin that made him comfortable. His thin lips lifted slightly. You can take the chance to tell me how we interacted in the past. She wasn't sure if it was because of his hot breath or Chinmo's actions, but her body started to heat up. Color finally returned to her lips. Bojo felt that this was a good opportunity. She glanced up. You used to listen to me. Is that so? Chinemo didn't stop, arching a brow. If I ask you to go east, you definitely wouldn't go west. You liked me a lot, and thought of many ways to confess to me. Oh. Chinemo paused, seemingly pondering over her words. Bojo reached out and hugged his neck, a smile on her face. Look at my face, brother Mo. You should know that there are many people chasing after me. That's why you often feel threatened and jealous. Do you think I've lost my mind after losing my memory, or is it because of the fever? Chinemo lifted her chin slowly. Do you think I'll do what you just said? Bojo didn't seem embarrassed at all. Yes. Chinemo looked at the girl who was asking for a yard after being given an inch. Suddenly, he placed the tip of her red ear between his lips and said evilly, If it's really like what you said, then I'm very proactive in bed. At this moment, Bojo realized where his hand was. Her body kept feeling hot. The current almighty was really hard to deal with in certain aspects. The moment Bojo thought about it, she felt as though someone had bitten her neck. So, my sugar daddy, how do you like me to serve you? Chinemo smiled, leaning forward to kiss the place he had bitten, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Chapter 1267. Her head started to spin, and even her breathing was hot. She wasn't sure if it was because of the hypnosis. The Almighty's most unscrupulous side burst forth. Even the way he kissed had changed a lot. It was evil and cold. Indeed, it was unstoppable. The numbness from her neck didn't allow her time to think. The slight itch was accompanied by a slight pain. It felt as though she was being embraced by a vampire. It was written in a book. The moment he kissed my neck, everything seemed to disappear. Only that wonderful comfort was left, making her drown in it. She could smell the scent on his body, the sweetness that made her sink deeper. You will never forget the scenery you saw at that time. It was like a falling meteor, her entire body yearning for more. Bojo reached out and hugged Chinemo. Her slender neck stretched out, like a pure maiden sacrificing herself to the devil. Chinmo's gaze darkened, his thin lips inching closer. Just as he was about to take another step, he realized that her face was unusually red. Her body temperature was higher than his. And why was there a wound on her hand? It seemed to have been cut by a metal wire, and there was even blood. Had it been when she had gotten out of the car to look for oil? She was indeed an idiot. They had already reached this stage. She had actually driven all the way. Chinemo couldn't describe his feelings. His pupils constricted slightly. There seemed to be something slowly overflowing from his chest. It was a little stuffy but not completely stuffy. But it was very hot, as though it was coming from inside her body. Especially when her breathing was so close to him, including her heartbeat that wouldn't lie. All these things added together made it hard for him to continue his original actions. He wanted to play with her fiercely before leaving. After all, he didn't believe a single word that came out of her mouth. For example, her sugar daddy. Chinmo's fingers brushed past her face, his voice low. Get up. MH. Bojo's head was still heavy. She couldn't understand what he was saying. Was he angry? Why was there a smile on his lips, but there wasn't any warmth in his eyes? Chinemo looked at her, bent down, and carried her horizontally. He strode into the bathroom and tore off her top in a few moves. It was too sudden. Bojio couldn't block in time. Under the light, it was an alluring expanse of snow white. Whether it was the collarbone or the shoulders, it was a symbol of a young girl's height. They were so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off them. Chinmo's eyes dimmed slightly when he saw this scene. Even his fingers paused for a moment. He seemed to be enduring something. Swoosh. He pulled out a towel and wrapped her up. However, that person was still smiling. Brother Emo, what's wrong? Chinemo tilted his head and pinched her chin. Don't you know you have a fever? Bojio paused, her expression a little dazed. Indeed, she hadn't noticed that her body temperature had risen. She muttered to herself, no wonder I started to feel dizzy. When Chinemo heard her words, he didn't know why, but he suddenly couldn't maintain his current face. He had originally planned to use this appearance to get closer to her and achieve his goal. Chapter 1268. She was only concerned about the other person and didn't care about herself at all. Chinemo didn't like her behavior, and even more so, he didn't like her affecting his emotions. Bojio glanced at him, suddenly understanding his actions. She reached out and hugged his waist, smiling faintly. Brother Emo, you're concerned about me. Chinmo's gaze froze. He couldn't turn his head away and scoffed. He pinched her hair between his fingers and said flirtatiously, Aren't you my sugar daddy? Of course I have to care. Otherwise, who would give me money to spend? You seem rather familiar with your position. Bojio coughed as she spoke, the smile on her face never fading. Chinemo frowned. What's wrong with your body? It wouldn't be like this if it was just a fever. Asthma. Bojio was indeed having trouble breathing. Chinemo watched her, an inexplicable sense of irritation in his chest. Regardless of his motive for being by her side, he didn't like to see his plaything in such a state. You can't breathe? A little. It wasn't too serious. Bojio was aware of her body condition. Chinemo held onto her waist, lifting her upwards. Let's change the way you breathe. Wh. Before Bojio could finish her sentence, he lowered his head and kissed her. The minty breath seemed to be able to lower her body temperature. The air in her mouth was so fresh it made her yearn for it. Kissing was an addictive thing. Especially when it was with the Almighty. Her breathing wasn't unbearable anymore. Just a little more and he would kiss her again, his fingers caressing her ears. Gently, as though he was treating a pet. Her heart was beating erratically. That seemed to be the most beautiful part. When the kiss ended, he pressed his forehead against hers, his breathing unstable, his gaze deep. It's sweet and satisfying. What did he mean by sweet and satisfying? In the past, the Almighty would never say that. Bojio's face heated up, the discomfort from her illness alleviated. But at this moment, she realized she was completely naked. Even though she was wrapped in a fur-colored bath towel, it was just a thin layer. It wasn't useful at all. The Almighty's chest was right in front of her. The lines were clear, as if they had been carved out. When he stood up, the mermaid lines were even more obvious. But his hands just hugged her, his fingers caressing her softness, and his eyes were filled with vampire-like wickedness. Yes, and very smooth. The numbness brought about by the skin contact made her legs lose some of their original strength. In the past, Bojio had never known that getting close to someone like this would be unbearable. But now that she was in his arms, just by looking at her, her heart would beat very fast, and every movement would cause a wave of numbness. Because this was none other than her pet. You used to call me an idiot when we were young. Chinemo arched a brow. Oh, Bojio replied. At that time, I really wanted to buy you. I even smashed the piggy bank that I had saved for a long time just to get my hands on you. I even asked you how much a kilo was worth. Chinemo smirked. Are you an idiot? Do you think people are sold by weight? When Bojio heard this, she paused, breaking into a smile. The exquisite little boy in her memory frowned like a prince. Little Bojio, are you an idiot? Do you think people are sold by weight? It was the same, even if she had lost her memory. Chapter 1269. With that, Chinmo's kiss landed on her neck again. Every kiss was slightly cold. Even after his body temperature had recovered, his skin was like a porcelain jade that melted in the touch. He pressed against her body without any distance, but he didn't take another step forward. The darkness in his eyes made him look more mischievous. Shall we sweat in another way? Bojio looked into his eyes, her consciousness fading. Her eyelashes trembled, and the air she exhaled became hotter. Chinmo's gaze deepened as he carried her. Wherever his fingers brushed past, Bojio couldn't help arching her back. It was as he had said, just to sweat. Hence, he didn't take any further actions. After making her blush, he would only chuckle in her ear and lick her lips lightly. Gradually, drowsiness overtook her. Bojio tilted her head and closed her eyes slowly. Chinmo looked at the person who had fallen asleep in his arms, his gaze deepening. Forget it. He wasn't in a hurry to leave. It didn't matter where he went. He could leave when he was no longer interested. My sugar daddy, how long will you keep me interested? Chinmo laughed, his fingers still playing with the youngster's black hair, his lips curving into a devilish smile. She wasn't without merits. At least this guy smelled good. The feeling in his arms was good too. Her entire body was warm. It was completely different from the coldness on his body. Chinmo raised a brow, placing his chin on the youngster's head. He held her with one hand and observed her in his arms. She was so sick that she shouldn't be aggressive anymore. But Chinmo knew that this wasn't her original self, because no one would dare to confront more than 10 speedboats like that. She lit a lighter and blew things up as she pleased. Even her posture looked good. It was rare to see such a well-behaved person. Indeed, at this moment, Bojio was very well-behaved. She looked like a little prince when she was quiet. Even her pure black hair hung down, covering her ears and eyes. Only the porcelain white curve of her chin could be seen. Chinmo looked at her for a moment, tilting his head and kissing the top of her head. After this action, Chinmo froze. Then he frowned, a faint coldness in his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. The night sky outside the window gradually surged. Because it had never been polluted, the starry sky outside was very beautiful. It's easy to fall asleep, especially when he was carrying someone in his arms. He didn't feel cold. In the latter half of the night, the temperature of the person in his arms increased. It was so high that Chinmo, who had fallen asleep, suddenly opened his eyes. Without any unnecessary movements, his first reaction was to place his hand on her forehead. When he felt the scalding heat, he turned to look at Bojio. His eyes darkened even more. He got up from the bed and walked out of the room half naked without even putting on a jacket. The sky is dark now. The boss was a local, and he was drinking downstairs. He probably had an appointment with a few of his friends, so he hadn't left yet. Chinmo didn't stop and walked over. Do you have alcohol here? The boss glanced at Chinmo but didn't reply. He continued to drink his wine, talking and laughing. Just as he was about to lean forward and put a peanut in his mouth, there was a swoosh sound. A poker card stabbed into the back of his hand. Blood flowed out instantly. Even though it wasn't a lot, the boss's entire face changed from the pain. The person sitting opposite him stood up abruptly, probably wanting to hit Chinmo's head. But the moment he raised the bottle, his wrist was grabbed. It was just a little force. Bang! He fell straight onto the ground. The expressions of the three people changed. Especially the boss. He looked at his hand, his gaze wavering. Chinmo held onto the handle of the chair, his lips curling up slightly. His voice rang beside the boss's ear like an elegant devil. Do you have alcohol here? Yes, yes, yes. The boss held onto his hand. I'll get it for you now. Chinmo smiled in satisfaction. Thank you. The boss trembled when he heard the two words. This man was really scary. Originally, the boss didn't take them seriously because they weren't locals. But now he didn't dare to neglect them anymore. This devil-like man didn't look like the weak and frail person he had when he was leaning on the youngster. Even though he was smiling, it sent chills down one's spine. They subconsciously obeyed his orders. Besides the alcohol, Chinemo also brought a basin of hot water upstairs. Before he left he said, "There's someone up there who's sick. He needs to rest and recuperate, so it's better not to make any unnecessary movements." The boss was startled. He hurriedly replied, "Yes." The pain on the back of his hand made him lose all his temper. The only person who wasn't injured came over. Who exactly is that person? He looks rather refined. How could he injure someone with poker cards? How would I know? If he knew, would he dare to be so reckless? Chinemo brought the basin of hot water into the room. The door was locked with a long leg. Indeed, even with his upper body bare, Chinemo was different from others. The nobility around him didn't dissipate. But because of the difference in his eyes, there was a hint of darkness mixed in. He glanced at Bojio, who was lying on the bed. He took a towel, dipped it in the hot water, and placed it on her fair forehead. The thermometers here weren't clean. Even if the boss had one, Chinemo didn't take it. For some reason, he had taken a candy from the snack counter at the front desk. At that time, he had been bored waiting for the hot water, and had played with it in his hands. Now he opened the packaging and used the end of the candy to touch the youngster's lips. Chinemo didn't see any reaction from her. He leaned over and used his lips to pry open her lips. Then he pulled away, allowing her to bite the candy in his hands. She probably tasted the sweetness in her mouth. The youngster's thin lips moved. Her brows weren't frowning as badly as before. Chinemo realized that he didn't like her unhappy expression. Since he had found a toy, the more exquisite it was, the better. Chinemo reached out and took her hand. He dipped a cotton swab in alcohol and smeared it inch by inch on her joints. It wasn't just her hands, but her knees, her collarbone, her lower abdomen. Bojio, whose entire body was burning uncomfortably, couldn't sleep well. When she felt the comforting coolness, she couldn't help opening her eyes. The first thing she saw was the handsome and fair side profile under the light. His head was lowered, and she was the only one in his eyes. Coincidentally, it brushed against her long legs. It would have been better if she hadn't woken up. Once she woke up, all her senses returned. Waves of numbness and that pair of deep eyes. Her body seemed to have turned into a pool of water, scattering softly on the ground. Even her eyes were wet. Chinemo looked at the youngster's flushed face and watery eyes. His hand paused. Maintaining that position, he leaned forward and planted a kiss on her collarbone. It was obviously different from before. His fingers were still in their original position. He slid down. The softness in his hand and the warmth of the jade on his body made his breathing unstable. But he still held it in, even though it was a strange way of holding it in. But as a criminal psychologist, how could he lay his hands on his own toy? Since it was a toy, he could play with it or abandon it, but he couldn't do it to the end. Chinemo paused at the last moment. He watched her glowing mole and smiled slowly. "My sugar daddy, you really can captivate me if you aren't careful." Bojio realized that he wasn't really willing to touch her. But her body was too cold and so was her consciousness. As she floated up and down, she closed her eyes again. After some time, she seemed to be pulled into someone's embrace. He could vaguely hear a voice ringing in his ears. It sounded a little arrogant. "It's already like this. Why hasn't the temperature dropped? My sugar daddy, you better get better. This is the first time I've served someone like this." Bojio wanted to laugh when she heard that. Who would force someone to lower their fever? Besides, the Almighty, you're actually talking about me, right? For some reason, Bojio felt that the Almighty's tone was extremely similar to when they were young. It was probably because it was too comfortable to be hugged. At 3 in the morning, Bojio felt her back breaking out in sweat. Her long legs rubbed against the wall, but she didn't move. He pressed her down. "What's wrong?" "Hot." Bojio wanted to pull the blanket away when she said this. Chinemo wrapped her up, preventing her from moving. He only said one word. "Sleep." But it was still hot. Bojio could only think of a way to absorb the coldness from his body. Chinemo glanced at the person whose face was pressed against his chest. His eyes darkened and his fingers tightened. The entire night passed like this. When she finally quietened down, the hair on her forehead was drenched in sweat and stuck to her face. Chinemo raised a brow. He felt the temperature on her forehead again. It wasn't as hot as before. Very good. He didn't want his toy to look so sickly. At around 4:30 p.m., Bojo was in a deep sleep. When she woke up, the sky was already bright. The sunlight shone through the window, splashing onto her face. When she turned her head, she saw the most intoxicating sleeping face in the world. Every time the Almighty fell asleep, he would remind her of the word holy. Be it when she was young or when she grew up. Bojo's gaze moved downwards. She saw the hand that was wrapped around her waist. The bed was indeed narrow. The two of them had to lie on their sides to sleep. It was also because of this that they were so close to each other that his breath could follow his movements and hit her ear. Then, something caught her attention. The one hanging around his neck seemed to be from that time. The moment Bojo reached out, he held onto her wrist. He flipped over, his breath falling. His gaze was heavy and his voice was seductive and hoarse. It seems like my sugar daddy doesn't know that the man in the morning can't be provoked. The next moment, Bojo felt the kiss landing on her shoulder. It was dense, with a slight bite. It made her heart beat faster. Even her mind was blank. The temperature in the room continued to rise, until there was water on her body. That was when Bojo realized that he had carried her to the bathroom. He was still kissing her. He seemed to like her reaction. His thin lips were lifted. He allowed her to lean on him after she lost all her strength. Other than kissing, they didn't do anything else. But the numbness from his fingers made Bojo tremble slightly. But she didn't understand why he stopped. Especially after he held onto her waist forcefully. He bit her shoulder. Then his breath faded and he pulled the towel over. Did we get along like this in the past? His black hair was still dripping. Drop by drop, it landed on her collarbone. Bojo was wrapped in the towel. MMH. She waited for the heat to dissipate. Chin Emo smiled, but his expression couldn't be seen. Is that so? Bojo felt that the Almighty shouldn't have such a reaction. Just as she was about to speak, he glanced up, a devilish glint in his eyes. So my sugar daddy likes this type. It's a pity your body doesn't allow it otherwise. Chin Emo leaned forward, his teeth biting her ear. His breath was still hot, but there wasn't a hint of warmth in his eyes. You can do anything. Bojo remained silent. That was because there was a clear knock on the door. The soundproofing in such a place wasn't good. Even with two doors separating them, the sound could still be heard. It was the boss. Breakfast is ready. If the two guests are awake, please come to the door to get it. Bojo arched a brow. Breakfast is provided in such a place? It wasn't her first time staying in such an inn. It was good enough that there was hot water. Why was there breakfast now? And the boss was here to deliver it? The naive Gio wouldn't have guessed that the boss had been frightened by the Almighty last night. Breakfast aside, the Manchu Han Imperial feast would probably be brought over. I'll go get it. Swoosh. Chin Emo opened the bathroom door, tossing two sets of clothes in before putting on a pair of black trousers. He looked especially handsome when he did all of this. Clean and cold. Compared to the Chin Emo of the past, he was indeed different. The moment he opened the door, the boss froze. The owner outside the door suddenly stiffened, and the hand holding the wooden plate trembled. The boss admitted that he had never seen such a handsome man, especially when his black hair was dripping with water. But that was why he resembled the devil in the comics. Especially his gaze. It was so cold it sent chills down her spine. The man seemed to be in a bad mood. It couldn't be. Could it be that he was stabbed again like last night? You can leave now. When there weren't any toys around, Chin Emo didn't care about his murderous aura. The boss trembled. Without another word, he passed the tray to the man and fled the scene. Now he couldn't help but admire the youngster who had helped the man into the inn last night. Speaking of which, it was that young man who had given him the illusion that his friend's body was extremely weak, and that he would feel pain if anything bumped into him. That was why the boss had thought that he was a noble vase. How was he a vase? He was clearly a devil. Chapter 1270. The breakfast was surprisingly sumptuous. The bread, fruits, and milk were all fresh. Bojo held on to the milk, watching the Almighty sitting in front of her. The conditions here didn't allow for a European-style dining table. It was just that the sunlight was too good. Even though one of them was standing and the other was sitting, the corners of their mouths were filled with sweetness as they ate. It was a simple life. It was probably because no one knew them here. Hence, there wasn't a need to disguise. It was the most natural state. Chinemo leaned against the wall with his upper body bare. He stood casually, but because of his long legs he looked extremely handsome. Coupled with his noble aura, it was a pleasure to look at him. Just looking at it was a pleasure. He tore open the bread, dipped it in jam, and fed it to a certain someone. A certain someone found it delicious. That was when he tried it. Bojio didn't seem to realize that she had become the Almighty's lab rat. She ate the bread in big mouthfuls, her cheeks puffed up. Eating was the happiest thing in the world. Chinemo realized that no matter what this fellow fed her, she would find it delicious. Even Chinemo didn't notice the smile on his face. Chinemo, who had an average appetite, ate quite a bit. He found one of the benefits of this toy: it was easy to eat. With this eating method, the two of them finished their breakfast in 2 to 3 bites. After she finished the milk, she casually picked up the hairdryer and reached out to press down on the Almighty, who was about to stand up. Chinemo arched a brow. Before he could say anything, he felt the hot air above his head. In addition, the youngster's fingers were fiddling with his hair. He didn't need to think to know what she was doing. He leaned against the wall, his line of sight able to see the loose sweater she was wearing. The fresh scent of a shower was even more obvious with the blowing of the hairdryer. He wasn't sure if it was because the sunlight was too good or because the strength was too moderate. When she moved her wrist, Chinemo didn't push her away. A glint flashed past his eyes. Bojio wore a mischievous expression. It wasn't easy to see the Almighty being so obedient. Chinemo wasn't suited for someone to rub his hair. He frowned, tilting his handsome face away. "Don't hide." Bojio pressed it back down and smiled. "You used to love me drying your hair. You would run over every time you washed your hair." Hearing this, Chinmo's eyes darkened. He wasn't happy, but he didn't show any signs of anger. However, he didn't like to hear her talk about the past. That would make him feel like he had no sense of existence now. Next, Chinemo moved. He reached out and pulled her hand over, planting a kiss on her fingertips. Just like that, they seemed to be touching. His entire body was bewitching. "My sugar daddy is really capable." With that, Chinemo stood up, grabbed the blowtorch, and threw it into the bathroom. He didn't seem to care if it was damaged. "It's getting late. Let's not waste time on such trivial matters. I'm curious about what kind of person I was in the past. If I go to a place I'm familiar with, I should be able to regain some of my memories. I'm very interested in the Jiang city you mentioned." Bojio noticed the coldness in his eyes, but he didn't seem to be fazed by it. To be exact, he was very interested in how they used to interact in the past. Chinmo's eyes turned red, carrying a hint of danger. Chapter 1271. Bojio noticed the change in the Almighty's attitude. From his resistance to the mention of it, there had never been any warmth in his gaze. But she didn't expose him. As long as the Almighty wanted to return to Jiang City, it didn't matter what his real motive was. There were less than 3 days left until the Asian Cup. She had checked the rules of the competition and the opponents she would encounter. Supreme Alliance needed the Almighty. It hadn't been easy for them to reach this stage. If they missed the championship again because they didn't leave on time, everyone would regret it for the rest of their lives. Compared to the new teams, Supreme Alliance wasn't young anymore. In the esports arena, there was never a lack of talented and young players. Most people wouldn't just say they liked a team, but they didn't really like one team. Great waves washing sand was the basic principle of this industry. Bojio wasn't the only one who understood this. Yinhu, Linfeng, Rao Rong, these players who had been playing for a few years all understood. Especially Yin Wuyao. Even though he said that his age wasn't stable. But deep down he knew that this wasn't his peak. After this battle, whether or not they could wait another year and continue on this path was unknown to everyone. They couldn't compare to the new teams. Those youngsters were still young and had unlimited possibilities. Hence, Bojo tried her best to bring the Almighty back to Jiang City. She knew that was what he wanted, even if he had forgotten about it. Actually, it didn't matter. She was helping him remember it. Compared to the ungoverned area, the bustling Jiang City had already started to advertise for the upcoming Asian Cup. Regardless of whether it was online or offline, anyone who played games knew that this year's Asian Cup would be held in Jiang City. The lights in the Qin Group's club were lit throughout the night. Yao Yao seemed to be living in the internet cafe. There was basically someone delivering food in the internet cafe. A set meal of rice with meat and vegetables for 10 yuan. There were many varieties such as shredded pork with chili sauce, shredded pork with garlic sauce and stir-fry. At noon, there weren't many people. In the evening, almost all the people who came to stay overnight would order a serving at around 12 o'clock. In the past, Shui Yaoyao had never eaten dinner because she was on a diet. Now, to familiarize herself with the battlefield, she would play games twice as often as before. When they were hungry, they would ask the people in the internet cafe for a portion. Now Shui Yaoyao had gained some fame. She also had fans on the internet. Yin Wuyao had specially prepared a hat for her. Feng Shang was sitting next to her, wearing the same baseball cap. Coco also wanted to come over for a free meal. Facing the mirror, he began to arm himself. After she was armed, she crept downstairs and silently walked past a dozen female fans waiting downstairs. She smiled so much that her eyes were curved. She took out her phone and sent a voice message to Yin Wuyao. "Uncle, I'm telling you, I was very successful this time. No one recognized me. Wait for me, I'll be there in a while." Yin Wuyao had a cigarette in his mouth. After listening to the voice message, he lifted his head slightly and didn't reply. No matter how Coco armed himself, he would be recognized. Unfortunately, Coco wasn't aware of this problem. He was very excited and looked like a cat-like teenager. Even his eyes were covered, but he had a pair of furry ears on his head. After all, Christmas was coming. As a typical otaku, Coco was very curious about everything. He had used 20 minutes to shake off his assistant. He had even used the excuse of a cold to trick him into buying medicine for him, so that he could go to the internet cafe at night. Coco rarely went out alone. He was a young master from abroad, and he was an esports celebrity that Supreme Alliance had specially groomed. Hence, his trips were destined to be different from others. Every time he went out, he would be followed by a nanny car. This wasn't an exaggeration. His fans were young, but they were very loyal. They would often wait downstairs and sometimes at the airport, although it wasn't on a large scale. But it was undeniable that it wasn't easy for Coco to go out. This time, Coco thought that he had finally shaken off his assistant and wanted to try taking the subway alone. He didn't know that his sneaky behavior had been captured by the people behind him. There were 3 girls covering their mouths and whispering, "Coco is so cute." He thought we couldn't tell who he was. He's so cute. Since someone had taken a photo, someone would definitely post it online. When Coco bought the subway card with his mask on, his eyes were very serious as he asked the ticket seller, "Do you know me?" Then he successfully got a subtle look from the ticket seller, asking him if he had some kind of mental illness. Coco wasn't angry. Instead, he was very satisfied. Look, everything was fine. He could go out by himself. However, the next second, his phone rang. His phone rang. It was Feng Yi. Coco was shocked. He looked around before picking up the call, pretending to be calm. "Hello, what's up? I'm playing games to train my hand speed. If there's nothing important, I'll hang up first." "Playing games? Training your hand speed?" Feng Yi laughed. "Why don't you explain to me how you train your hand speed by playing games in the subway?" Coco froze. He told himself that Fox Feng couldn't possibly know where he was. He must be trying to bomb him. "Cough, what are you saying? I can't hear you. The game is dying." Feng Yi heard this and placed his pen down slowly. He looked at the tablet that the assistant brought over. The photo on it was very eye-catching. "The cat ears on your head look good. F***ck. Coco took off his mask and was a little annoyed. "How did you know?" Feng Yi gestured to the assistant before saying, "It's all thanks to your huge number of fans. There should be a few behind you now and there will be more in the future." It's best that you leave before anyone can react. As for the place you want to go to, do you want to cause the internet cafe to close down? Stay where you are and don't move. The assistant will be there in a minute. Coco actually didn't understand. Foxphone, be honest, are you hiding something from us? Otherwise, even in the past, he would occasionally come out for a breather. It wouldn't affect the overall situation. Fengyi paused. No. Coco wore his mask. Who are you lying to? It's not like I don't go online. Those people are still scolding Little Spade. That's why you're worried about others. Fengyi laughed. Since you're clear, come back obediently. Got it. Coco tilted his head, his eyes dimming. But is it always going to be like this? Sometimes, he didn't understand the speculations the netizens had towards that person. Just because that person was a girl, all her previous efforts were denied. If it hadn't been for Big Spade, they wouldn't have been able to qualify and would have lost in the provincial team competition. How could they have a future? Big Spade had never done anything overboard. If she had really found a substitute player or done something immoral, he wouldn't forgive her, because it was related to professionalism. But so what? Coco still believed that fans shouldn't be like this. But he knew that some people had used their love as an excuse to force Fengyi to spare some time to manage. Some people's love was scarier than disgust. They used that word to blackmail you into thanking her. If you didn't thank them, they would think you didn't cherish your true fans. The comments online didn't die down. Sometimes Coco's heart would turn cold. He had asked himself why he still wanted to play esports. There were thousands of reasons to tell him to give up. But there was one reason he couldn't let it go. His teammates were here. There were so many people holding up signs, supporting him. This was probably the question that every Supreme Alliance member would be thinking about in the middle of the night. But they didn't know. The matter online was one thing. What truly made Fengyi feel helpless was that he had used his family's connections to obtain accurate information from the compound. Qin Mo was missing. And the higher-ups were trying to find him. There wasn't any specific content, and the person who said it wasn't clear. Because anything related to Qin Mo was too confidential. Fengyi put down the phone in his hand. How was he going to tell the players who were still waiting for Qin Mo's return that their captain wouldn't be coming back? Boss Feng. The assistant watched the vice president's expression worriedly. She had been in the club for so long, but had never seen Fengyi like this. Regardless of the time, he would never let people think Supreme Alliance was in danger. Even after the competition ended, he still had a fox-like smile on his face, moving freely in and out of the mall. But this time, he took off his glasses, probably because he was too tired. Even his voice was a little hoarse. Go and write the press release. Are we really going to do that? The assistant couldn't help but ask. Is there a possibility of a turnaround? Fengyi glanced over, rubbing his brows, not saying a word. The assistant continued. Actually, Boss Feng, I used to resent Big Spade too. After all, I couldn't understand why she wasn't afraid of anything, not even her fans. What right did she have to be like that? Later on, I understood that she didn't do anything wrong. Esports is just esports. If it wasn't for her, Supreme Alliance would forever be stuck in the provincial competition. It's us outsiders who think too much. If we like an idol, we should let that idol do as we want. This is a problem in itself. Fengyi tilted his head, lighting a cigarette. It's too late. After going through that kind of thing, no one would come back. Many people said that the fans would be bitterly disappointed. Perhaps they didn't know. As an idol, they would be bitterly disappointed. But at this moment, a video suddenly appeared on Weibo. The media was shocked at the number of reposts. How could it be so high? It was about to become a hot topic. Fengyi was still thinking about how to get Coco out of the whirlpool of public opinion without being used by others. He didn't notice the commotion on the internet. It was someone from the publicity department. He pushed open the meeting room door, panting heavily as he looked at Fengyi. Boss Feng, Weibo. Fengyi's face changed, thinking that something had happened on Weibo. Everyone knew that Supreme Alliance was on the verge of collapse. Ever since the news of Spade Z being a girl was exposed, the internet hadn't calmed down. If it happened again, Even Feng Yi wasn't sure if they would lose the Asian Cup before the competition even started. Boss Feng here. The person in charge of the operations took a laptop, clicking on one of the Weibo posts. The post was written like this. Do you still remember the brothers who used to play together in the dormitory? Do you still remember the crystal that you pushed away together? Do you still remember the days when you turned around and clapped with that person? Shouting double kill. Instant noodles flying everywhere? Do you still remember the team that you loved the most, Supreme Alliance? After the two words Supreme Alliance landed, it was a video. The video was like a micro-movie, but it was as though it was happening right beside them. The first scene of the video was of a teacher, teaching ABCD on the stage. The second scene was of a computer programmer. The camera slid over to the hero icon on his computer screen. He was working overtime late at night, staring at the icon for a long time without opening it. The third scene was of a driver, his body leaning back, waiting for the traffic light. He heard a middle school student beside him talking. Did you know that this year's Asian Cup will be held in Jiang City? Supreme Alliance will be competing. The driver's fingers paused, only starting the car after 3 seconds. The fourth scene was of a person working on a video, but he couldn't do it well. He was obviously being scolded, turning his head to smoke. Brotherly, buy me a bottle of water. Someone ordered him. He didn't move. The person saw him looking at his computer, arching a brow. Brotherly, do you know how to play games? Nope. However, the next moment he lifted his head to see a video. Almost at the same time, the other three were watching the video from different places. It was a video of Supreme Alliance competing in the National League. 11 of them, lined up, their uniforms fluttering in the wind. When you dream in the middle of the night, do you still remember the path you took when you were young, the people you loved, the games you played? In 2018, we will wait for you here, Supreme Alliance. In that instant, the gazes of the four of them changed. The scene returned to a year ago, when they were sitting in the dormitory, each of them wearing headphones, throwing peanuts at each other. Buses, high-speed trains, taxis. The background music started. It was the song Spadesy had hummed during the filming of the variety show. You and I come from small villages in Hubei, Sichuan, Guangxi, Ningxia, Hunan, Shandong, Guizhou and Yunnan. We once swore to be great people, but one day in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, we suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, as though we were woken up by fate. It said that we can't live like this. It said that we can't live like this for the rest of our lives. Swoosh. The scene changed. The four of them gathered in Jiang City. After hugging, they sat in the internet cafe, just like in school. They wore their headphones and the special effects of burning blood started playing. We're here, the real Supreme Alliance. Where are you? The real Supreme Alliance? Feng Yi paused. Even the people from the publicity department had tears in their eyes as they watched from behind. Without Spadesy, how could the Supreme Alliance be considered the real Supreme Alliance? What shocked them was that the video wasn't over. It was followed by a 5-second interview. I'm from Jiangxi, Big Spade, where are you? Reporting from Shandong, I'm here to watch the competition. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, Supreme Alliance is complete with Almighty Z. I'm in Hangzhou. The first time I heard about Spadesy, I found her extremely handsome. The FC King of Zone C. She doesn't say a word when she's playing. She's so cool. As long as we follow behind her, we can win. Is it time? It's a pity, Almighty Z. I miss you so much. Almighty Z. I miss you so much. It was just a few words, but they came from all over the world. Yes, it wasn't just China. There were people of other colors too. Every time a city's name flashed across the video, it was a shocking sight. In the end, there was only one sentence. Supreme Alliance, we'll be waiting for your return. The operations manager was a lady after all. She couldn't help but cry. Feng Yi stood there, dressed in a well-ironed suit. When he turned back, he saw the names of the team members. One after another, the names were filled, leaving only the assassin's spot. Feng Yi inhaled deeply. Contact the committee and report Spadesy's name. But what if she can't make it back in time? The operations manager sniffled. Feng Yi didn't shift his gaze. She has to appear on the list at the very least. All right. The operations manager knew how much pressure the team would face if she reported her name. The netizens wouldn't let up on Spadesy's cross-dressing scandal. If they lost, Supreme Alliance would be doomed. But what could they do? Who hadn't been young and capricious before? The phone in the club was about to explode with calls. Many people suspected that it was Feng Yi's methods since he was good at creating hype. But later on, people realized it wasn't anyone's doing. Those reposts, those comments, those voices on the official platform. If you had the heart, please take a look. What kind of expectations did a true fan have? If you really liked him, don't do anything he didn't like. If you really like someone, stay closer to his competition and away from his private life. If you really liked this team, you just hope to take one more look at them, to be able to stay together, even if it was just one more competition. They knew that in less than a year, these people would gradually retire. Perhaps many years later, they would become people they didn't even know. For work, for business, for socializing, they were always in a hurry. But even if one day they could still remember their current feelings, that would be enough. Many people had forgotten something. Esports wasn't the entertainment industry. They might have looked at the face and appearance. But there was a group of people who truly loved it. That was how cohesive they were. In the end, the producer of the video was found out. He was a fan. That's right, a fan. It was a real person, one of the 4 people in the video. The twisted girls on the internet would probably never understand how much courage Supreme Alliance could bring to some people. And this courage was best described from a man's perspective. Chapter 1272. Have you ever felt that way? His throat tightened, not because he was upset but because he was touched. Whether it was an ordinary person or a member of the esports arena, they all had the same reaction when they saw the video. Lin Feng wore a sweater, standing in front of a store, watching the video on the screen, a cup of coffee in his hand. If little Spade knew there were so many people waiting for her, I wonder if she would come back. Yin, who stood behind him, both hands in the pockets of his trench coat, glancing over. Lin Feng frowned, muttering, I wonder where that fellow went. I can't contact him at all. Compared to Lin Feng, Yin, who had always thought deeper. In his heart, the youngster wasn't simple. Since he couldn't contact him, there must be something else. It's 5, if we don't leave now, there will be many people in the supermarket. That was right. The 2 of them came out to shop. Lin Feng didn't know who was his mother's biological son. Ever since Yin Hu came back, he had been fed with all sorts of soup and water. She had even said that they were going to compete, and that he had to nourish himself. It had been 3 consecutive days. Every day, she would send Lin Feng out to buy bones to make soup. As an esports almighty, he had become a professional at fighting for bones with the aunties in the supermarket. Today, his mother wasn't too much, saying that Yin Hu would drive over, and they could buy a new pot together. At the start, Lin Feng had been rather happy, but after coming out, it wasn't the same. He felt that it was a little awkward for the 2 of them to shop together. Moreover, they bought fruits and vegetables, an area that men rarely came to. Yin Hu was calm, pushing a shopping cart, his long legs walking in front. He wore a beige double-breasted trench coat, making him look gentler than usual. Lin Feng was afraid someone would recognize them and take photos of them together, hence, he wore a pure black mask. The mask was huge, but it didn't have the effect of keeping a low profile. Both of their figures and aura were there. Even without their faces, they looked like they were in middle school. Walking in the fruits and vegetables area was indeed a little eye-catching. How could someone so handsome come to such an area? There were already a few girls who couldn't help looking over. Lin Feng still had the burden of being an idol. He rushed Yin Hu as he walked. Hurry up. All right. Yin Hu agreed, but his movements were still slow. He walked to Lin Feng's side and turned his body slightly. Do you want potatoes? Lin Feng nodded his head, his eyes darting back and forth. Who cares what it is? Leaving as soon as possible after buying it is the right thing to do. Yin Hu glanced at him before glancing at the girls not far away. He turned his head and casually placed the packaged potatoes on Lin Feng's face. Weigh them. Oh, weigh me. Lin Feng had never felt so guilty before. The topic of two people shopping in the supermarket was really sensitive. Yin Hu watched his actions, his gaze deepening. When he returned, he lowered his head and asked, "Do you want some oranges?" Lin Feng also realized that this kind of whispering was too intimate. His face was a little uncomfortable from the other person's breath. He moved his body to the left and said, "You can buy whatever you want. Then take a few." Yin Hu acted as though he didn't see him dodge, remaining calm. Even Lin Feng found it strange. After all, in his impression, Yin Hu didn't seem like someone who would shop in a supermarket. Chapter 1273. Yin Hu was indeed different now. If it was in the past, he would still be worried about whether he should turn Lin Feng gay. Ever since he had left and this guy had cried, he didn't have to worry anymore. Instead of thinking about whether to turn him gay, it was better to think about how to turn him gay. Yin Hu glanced sideways, glancing at the masked man beside him. Since they had already come this far, he couldn't retreat to the position of a good brother. He might as well take the initiative. Lin Feng didn't know what Yin Hu was thinking. He glanced at the things in the cart. "We're almost done. Shall we go? Let's go to the snacks area." Yin Hu was pushing the shopping cart. Their movements were completely under his control. Lin Feng glanced at the girls again. "Didn't you never eat snacks?" "My taste has changed recently," Yin Hu replied casually. "This is your favorite brand of chips, right? What flavor is good?" When Lin Feng turned his head again, he saw Yin Hu holding the snacks he usually ate. Barbecue flavor. Since he had already taken it, he might as well take a few more bags. Lin Feng thought about it and reached out his hand. Just then he heard the sound of a phone photo. It was the two girls from before. Lin Feng's movements froze mainly because of his posture. Yin Hu stood motionless in front of the snacks rack. Lin Feng reached out his hand to support his back. He looked as though he was about to push him against the wall. This was a huge misunderstanding. Lin Feng turned, wanting to chase after them and get the girl to delete the photo. Yin Hu grabbed his wrist, his voice calm. "You want everyone here to know that you are Lin Feng. They probably just took a photo casually. They don't know who you and I are." When Lin Feng heard this, he glanced over again. The two girls didn't ask for their autographs and didn't continue taking photos. They seemed to have taken the photo because they saw the two of them shopping in the supermarket. The girls also realized that their actions just now were probably not very polite. When they saw the handsome man wearing a mask looking at them, they were startled. They decided to walk over and admit their mistake. "I'm sorry, I took a photo because you are so lovey-dovey." The girl took out her phone. "I'll delete it now." Lin Feng was speechless. Too loving, too loving? Yin Hu pushed the cart with one hand and held on to a certain someone with the other. His thin lips curved upwards. "It's okay. As expected, I didn't guess wrong. It's rare to see two boys shopping and cooking together in the supermarket. As expected, only a couple would do that." The girl smiled happily. Lin Feng. He actually couldn't refute that. Yin Hu didn't know what else he said. The two girls glanced at Lin Feng. Seeing that he was wearing a mask, they had no intention of saying anything. They giggled and said, "How awkward." Lin Feng wanted to take off his mask again. Him. Yin Hu seemed to have seen through his thoughts and lowered his voice. "Be careful of fans." Lin Feng's throat kept repeating the word F***ck until the man left. Actually, he knew that he couldn't blame the two girls. The Empress Dowager was the real culprit. Why didn't she consider that two boys would be awkward when shopping in the supermarket? And why do you buy so many things? Yin Hu didn't have any intention of leaving. Chapter 1274. How about trying this noodles? Yin Hu asked casually. Lin Feng was confused. This person pulled down his mask just to let him try the noodles in the supermarket. What if someone saw through him? Moreover, the supermarket staff standing at the side had a suggestive smile on their faces. That was true. They probably hadn't seen two men being so intimate before. Lin Feng swallowed the noodles hurriedly, replying casually, "It's delicious." "Buy a few bags then. It can be a midnight snack at the club." Yinhu's actions were natural. There was nothing wrong with it. Lin Feng's face was still hot. The warmth made him want to leave quickly. Let's go once you're done. If they stayed any longer, they would probably become a couple in the eyes of others. Who had a boyfriend? Even though his phone hadn't been ringing for the past 2 days. It was probably because the training mission was too heavy and he didn't have time to contact him. But if the two of them were really recognized and someone exaggerated something, maybe Hu Zi's boyfriend would misunderstand. Lin Feng thought about it and felt that it wasn't appropriate to stay any longer. But Yinhu didn't think so. It wasn't easy for them to be alone. Of course, the longer the better. But he also understood that he couldn't force him too close. You still haven't bought the ice cream. Didn't you say you wanted ice cream just now? Yinhu's words were reasonable. Lin Feng thought about it. It would be awkward if he overreacted. It wasn't a big deal to leave after taking the ice cream. But when he opened the freezer and picked an ice cream, the man bent down and picked an ice cream across him. Is this a new product from China? Lin Feng replied, his mind drifting. He tried his best to avoid contact. He was a man. Why was he so repressed recently? What flavors do you have? Yinhu asked. Lin Feng tried to make himself look more manly. Strawberry and peach. Oh, that should be good. Yinhu fiddled with it a few more times. He took the peach ice cream and placed it in the cart. When he lowered his gaze, he could see the pink on his fair neck. It was really attractive. Yinhu's hand paused subconsciously, his gaze deepening. On the other side, the naive Lin Feng felt that his brother was deliberately stalling for time. But after thinking about it carefully, there was no need to stall for time just to pick an ice cream. After denying his thoughts, he watched as Yinhu went to the other fridge to get the yogurt. He couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He leaned over and took all the ice cream he liked and placed them all in the cart. Are you done? Yinhu walked back and glanced at Lin Feng. As expected, he couldn't be too strict with this guy. Lin Feng nodded. I'll queue up. All right. Finally, he could leave. In the future, he would come to the supermarket by himself. Lin Feng thought about it and decided to find a place near the cashier to wait for Yinhu to settle the bill. Unfortunately, he was standing in the most awkward position. People who frequented supermarkets all knew the layout of supermarkets. Condoms were usually placed near the cashier, and they were arranged very beautifully. They were packaged in various colors, and they even looked like candies and chocolates. Chapter 1275. Lin Feng had originally planned to leave calmly. After all, there was nothing wrong with a condom if you ignored it. You could just brush past it like chewing gum. Who knew that he hadn't retracted his gaze? There was an additional arm on his shoulder. It was Yinhu who had wanted to pay the bill. It was normal for boys to hook their shoulders. I didn't bring my wallet. That was Yinhu's first sentence. His second sentence was accompanied by his gaze. Lin Feng knew that he was going to embarrass himself this time. So you were looking at this. Lin Feng wanted to say that it was a coincidence. But before he could speak, Yinhu's voice came from beside his ear. Yinhu's voice entered his ears again, his breath just enough to sweep past his ears. Have you decided which brand to buy? What brand? He didn't have any experience. How would he know about brands? Yinhu arched a brow. Condom brand, which one do you like? Lin Feng coughed. He couldn't let Yinhu think that he was a newbie. This was the biggest taboo for a man. He had to maintain his image. He said nonchalantly, the brand doesn't matter. The main point is the quality. After all, I have a long time. When he said this, Yinhu glanced in his direction, his gaze deep. Lin Feng was a little annoyed. What's with that look? Nothing. Yinhu smiled, glancing sideways. This is the first time I know that you have a long time. Lin Feng looked at the face that was inches away from him. His face flushed when he said go to hell. This was the disadvantage of being a good brother. He knew everything. Buy this. Yinhu pulled the topic back naturally. If the brand is good, there are many flavors to choose from. Don't you like strawberry? I have it here. As Yinhu spoke, his hand reached out. His fingertips touched the exquisite packaging. He casually threw 3 bags into the car. Wait a minute. When did he say that he wanted to buy this thing? And why did he take so many? Lin Feng's eyes widened. But Yin Hu's tone was very deliberative. He couldn't say anything. After all, he was the one who stood here first. However, Lin Feng felt that something was strange. When he raised his head, he saw a few girls sneaking glances in their direction. They covered their mouths with a suggestive look on their faces. There was obvious excitement on their faces, and he could vaguely hear them saying, "Not only are you buying groceries together, but you're also buying condoms together. Are you guys living together? Did you guys hear that?" The attacker said that the submissive likes strawberry flavor. Strawberry. What it's Sundra? Lin Feng. He finally knew what was wrong. Why did he have to stand here with Hu Zi for such a long time? Even discussing the taste of this thing. Not to mention these girls, even if he saw 2 men buying condoms together, he would also think in that direction. He really couldn't explain himself even if he jumped into the Yellow River. But since he had already taken it, he couldn't just put it back. Forget it, quickly pay the bill. Pay the bill and leave quickly. Fortunately, both of them were wearing masks. Otherwise, if it was posted on the internet, it might attract a storm of blood. After knowing that Yun Hu didn't bring his wallet, Lin Feng went to queue up. When he was paying the bill, he watched as the cashier swept a glance at the item. Lin Feng's gaze was clearly wavering. Chapter 1276. No matter how he looked at it, he didn't seem like he had any experience. Yun Hu could still remember how he felt when this person went on a date with the girl who had given him the love letter, and didn't return until the next day. At that time, he didn't have a driver's license and couldn't drive the family car. He had asked the driver to bring him everywhere to look for this person. In the end, he hadn't found him. That day had become the day he regretted the most. No one could understand how his heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. At that time, he hadn't understood why he had been so flustered and uncomfortable. He had kept his eyes open until the next day. He picked up his bag and went to school. When he saw that person chatting happily in class, someone asked him what he had done with the class bell next door. He grabbed a book and threw it over, scolding jokingly, "Don't ask, I have a temper too." Only he could see that person's face was a little red when he said this. That day he hadn't spoken to him. He had been afraid that he would explode the moment he spoke. Yet he had said in front of him that girls were different from boys. They were like cotton, very soft. That was one of the few times he had a cold war with him. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear him describe that night. For a whole month, he hadn't spoken to him. At the same time, he understood what jealousy was. Because he was so jealous, he had subconsciously looked at that girl. Until that girl had asked if she wanted to do her homework at the coffee shop with a red face. Yin Hu had agreed with a faint smile. Yes, he wanted to let him know that some people weren't worthy of his constant attention. Very quickly, he had been punched by him. It was so heavy that even now when he thought about it, he still asked himself what exactly he had wanted to do. Perhaps he had been too jealous. Jealous that that girl could have him for a night. But he hadn't gotten anything, even though they had been so close. Looking at it now, according to a certain someone's personality, perhaps nothing had happened that day. After all, as a certain someone had said, he had been through hundreds of battles. So how could he explain his current expression? Yun Hu glanced at Lin Feng's face, watching as he uncomfortably placed the 3 bags into the plastic bag. He was only wearing a thick black sweater, but he was more handsome than everyone else. He even gave off a carefree vibe. But Yin Hu knew this person's state better than anyone else. He had no experience. Yin Hu's lips curved into a smile when he thought about it. Lin Feng was still grumbling that he would never come to the supermarket together again. He was really unlucky. Being naive, he didn't notice that his words had been seen through. The car was on the ground. It was dark black and not eye-catching at all. But those who were familiar with cars knew that ordinary families couldn't afford to use a Qian as a means of transportation. Lin Feng was already used to it. After all, he knew how the Yun family was like. Yin Hu tilted his head and spoke on WeChat. The person who sent the message was none other than Mother Lin. Yeah, Lin Feng and I finished shopping and we're just about to head back. I think there will be a little traffic jam at this time. After reporting the progress, Yinhu placed his phone at the side. After glancing at Lin Feng, he suddenly leaned forward. Lin Feng was still holding something in his hands. What are you doing? Fasten your seatbelt. Yinhu's attitude was natural. Lin Feng was extremely uncomfortable. He was too close. I'll fasten it myself. Yinhu didn't force him. After retracting his hand, he asked casually, who are you going to use those things with? Don't you have a girlfriend yet? Lin Feng choked and laughed dryly. Who said I don't have one? Why? Are you pretending to have one? Yinhu turned the steering wheel with one hand and smiled. When we just left, you told Auntie Lin to prepare for the competition seriously and not consider personal matters. Did you forget it so quickly? When Lin Feng heard this, he knew he couldn't fool him anymore. He tilted his head and lit a cigarette. He was really rascally. Can't I keep it for storage? Of course. Yinhu took the opportunity to light a cigarette while waiting for the red light. His gaze deepened. It's convenient. Convenient? What was convenient? Lin Feng was puzzled by what he heard. He felt that Yinhu was hinting at something. There's no need for me to buy it. Yinhu blew out a smoke ring. He seemed to be very close to him. Lin Feng completely misunderstood Yinhu. He thought about his boyfriend. If you need it, you can take it away now. Yinhu glanced at him. Do you want to use it now? No. Lin Feng flicked the cigarette ash. He hadn't expected to encounter such a situation and ask him for such things. Yinhu replied slowly. Then I don't need it now. MMH. Lin Feng didn't know what to say. If something really happened between him and his boyfriend one day, it was best not to let him know. He felt a tightness in his chest. It should be better to smoke. That was what Lin Feng thought. Yinhu also realized that this person probably didn't understand what he meant. But it didn't matter. When the competition ended, he would have a good talk with him. There was indeed a traffic jam. When they reached home, Lin Feng returned to his usual young master manner and placed the plastic bag on the sofa. I'm exhausted. I told Empress Dowager, can you go shopping yourself in the future? I can't. Mother Lin was beautiful. Have you seen any beauty go shopping in the market? I just did my nails. What if I spoil them again? Look at Lin Hu and look at you. Both of you are going shopping. Lin Feng. Really, he definitely wasn't related. Let me see what you bought. Mother Lin said as she flipped through the bags. Lin Feng leaped up instantly and pulled the bags towards the river. Mother Lin was confused. Son. Cough. Lin Feng cleared his throat. Yinhu said that his throat is sore. Go make some pear soup for him first. We'll look at the vegetables later. If he flipped through the bags, he would be dead. You little rascal. You are quite caring. Mother Lin nodded and went to make the pear soup happily. Lin Feng felt that it was a false alarm. He hurriedly took out the 3 bags and stuffed them into his trouser pocket before heaving a sigh of relief. Yinhu, who was sitting beside him, looked at him with a smile as though it was nothing, and as though he was making a fuss out of nothing. That was true. He was inexperienced. Yinhu had a boyfriend, so he couldn't compare. Lin Feng felt that the things in his trouser pocket were getting more and more uncomfortable. He decided to find a place to throw them away. The moment he entered his room, someone followed behind him. The door was pushed open and he didn't stop his actions. Everything had probably been seen, so there was nothing to hide. Lin Feng stuffed his hands into his trouser pocket and met Yunhu's eyes. They seemed a little indifferent and deep. A ray of light flashed past as though he was hurt by something. Chapter 1277. Lin Feng grabbed his hair. I didn't think I could use it, and it would be awkward if my mom saw it. I might as well throw it away. Yinhu's gaze landed on his face. Didn't I ask you to keep it? Lin Feng couldn't control himself. Can't you buy it when you want to use it with your boyfriend? Why do you want me to keep it for you? Yinhu looked at him, his voice slow. What boyfriend? Are you trying to provoke me? Lin Feng reached out and pulled the man's collar up. What boyfriend are you talking about? Don't tell me you're learning from those people on the internet, fooling around with anyone you meet. Yunhu arched a brow. With a flip of his hand, he pressed Lin Feng against the wall, his hand still holding onto Lin Feng's wrist. If I was just fooling around, would I have waited for you for so long? Lin Feng's face turned red at this baffling question. You can talk, but can you not be so close to me? F***ck. Lin Feng really didn't know what to say. Yunhu inched closer to the person's face and smiled slowly. Are you shy? F***ck. Lin Feng inhaled deeply. Let go of me first. Yunhu bent over. I'm not letting go. F***ck. Lin Feng was going crazy. Yunhu felt that it wasn't bad, especially when he saw the flush on his face. His heart itched, as though there was a cat scratching his heart. You. Just as he was about to talk about his so-called boyfriend, Lin Feng seemed to have found his savior. Lin Feng looked as if he had finally found his savior, and used his hand to push him away. Get away, there's a call. There was indeed a call. From his position, Yunhu could feel his phone vibrating in his pocket. He had no choice but to let go of him. Lin Feng heaved a sigh of relief. The call came at the right time. He reached out to take the phone. When he saw the caller ID, he was completely different. He immediately pressed the answer button. F***ck. Little Spade. You have to tell me clearly where exactly are you. I'm telling you, don't find an excuse to hang up on me. Senior Lin, you're still as energetic as ever. I didn't intend to hang up. I called to tell you that Brother Mo and I are flying to Jiang City tomorrow, and we need someone to cover us. Qin Mo nodded. Senior Lin, you're still as energetic as ever. I didn't intend to hang up. The captain is with you? Lin Feng's voice was filled with surprise. In the end, she decided not to tell him about the Almighty's amnesia, since there were still people investigating. We'll talk when we meet. I have a car here that needs to be taken over. You can be my guarantor, and we'll talk about the rest when we meet. Car. Sure. This was the advantage of being naive and sweet. She wouldn't ask too many questions. After Bojio hung up, she lifted her head and met his gaze. That person had just finished washing up, and his whole body was still emitting a refreshing mint scent. He was leaning against the door frame and looking at her. He must have heard the contents of her phone call, because his peach blossom eyes were very deep. Bojio stood up and walked over. I just made a call to our mutual friend. Oh. Qin Mo chuckled, but no one could tell what he was thinking. Chapter 1278. Bojio wasn't wrong. Indeed, Qin Mo wasn't interested in anyone else other than his prey, especially when he knew she still had friends. In his heart, his prey only had to look at him. How could there be a friend? Qin Mo smiled, but there wasn't a hint of warmth in his eyes. But at this moment, he wouldn't allow himself to show it. He hadn't forgotten his persona. He had to be gentle at all times. Shall we go downstairs? Qin Mo asked, reaching for his coat. Bojio watched his tall and slender back view, unable to read his thoughts. But she understood that people who had lost their memories tended to distance themselves from others. But the Almighty was different. He seemed to believe everything that she said. They didn't bring any luggage. In such a lawless area, identification wasn't required, and they could check in immediately. Hence, it was easy to leave the hotel. After a night's sleep, the Almighty seemed to have recovered completely. It didn't look like he had had a fever the night before. Bojio was the same. It wasn't because of her healing abilities, but after thinking about it, the things the Almighty had done last night were enough to make a person sweat until their fever subsided. Boss, do you have petrol here? Bojio decided to stock up on petrol for little Blackie before leaving. Unexpectedly, the boss's expression changed when he saw them, turning into a servant that answered every question. Petrol? I have a freshly filled car here. If you need it, I'll get it right away. As the owner spoke, when he passed by the Almighty, he revealed a flattering smile. Bojio arched a brow. The boss hadn't been this way when they had checked in last night. Why was it so different this morning? Seeing the Almighty was like a mouse seeing a cat. No, It was even scarier than seeing a cat. Brother Mo, you came down yesterday? That was her first reaction. Chin Mo didn't deny it, a warm smile on his face. I informed the boss when I asked for the petrol. Bojo was suspicious. Just a greeting? It seems like Sugar Daddy doesn't trust me. Chin Mo replied nonchalantly. I thought you would believe anything I say. Aren't you my lover? Bojo couldn't stand the way the Almighty was talking to her. Even though his attitude was casual, she started to reflect on herself. Of course I trust you. MH. Chin Mo lowered his gaze. Bojo couldn't help but lean over and kiss him. I'll believe everything you say. Chin Mo chuckled. Boss's tone wasn't good yesterday, so I taught him some manners. Good teaching. When the boss who brought the gas heard the young man's words, he just wanted to send these two living bodhisattvas away as soon as possible. Do you have any idea how lethal this one of yours is? You're treating him like a porcelain doll. The boss dared to be angry but did not dare to say anything. After all, when the man glanced at him without any emotion, he could feel a chill all over his body. He didn't know if the youth was really stupid or just pretending to be stupid. Since she brought such a man with her, he knew this kind of person the best. He looked gentle, like the most loyal butler. In fact, if one wasn't careful and bit down on him, he would be like a demon deacon, sucking his blood dry with the most elegant dining posture. Chapter 1279. With that, the boss couldn't help but admire the youngster's calmness. After all, he had experienced how scary this man could be. But this man was impressive. He was able to turn into another person in front of the youngster. There wasn't the slightest bit of malevolence from last night. He was acting innocent. Chin Mo was satisfied with the effect of his gaze. In front of his prey, he didn't want anyone else to speak. He didn't want to tear off this layer of disguise because the youngster's reaction was interesting. As long as he showed the slightest sign of weakness, she would hold him in her palms and use kisses to coax him. It was a refreshing feeling for Chin Mo. Besides, his prey wasn't stupid. It wouldn't be interesting if she simply thought that he was good. From the youngster's reaction, it was obvious that he had already guessed what he had done. However, he had still praised him for teaching him well. Chin Mo couldn't help but smile. Even when they were in the car, Chin Mo was still smiling. The moment little Blackie turned on the AI system, the car shook from the force. What was wrong with the devil? Why was he smiling so sweetly? He seemed to have sensed the change in the Lamborghini. Chin Mo turned over. This car isn't bad. Other than the land and water forms, what else is there? There isn't any form, but it can be used as a network hub. Bojo was in a good mood. It was a satisfying thing to have the Almighty stay by her side obediently. Xiaohei, on the other hand, didn't feel so good about it. It felt that there was something fishy about the devil praising it. As an intelligent car, the information it had gathered told it that a devil like this would never praise anyone unless there was some ulterior motive. But its master, Sigh. Little Blackie didn't want to say anything else. Ever since the devil had appeared, its position as the number one car pet hadn't returned. Chin Mo did have a motive, but it wasn't a big one. To him, he was more interested in a prey that only had him in her eyes. Hence, he didn't say anything else. Bojo waited for a moment before turning the car. It was a beautiful maneuver, a smile on her face. Oh right, the password for this car is, Chin Mo, I like you. Chin Mo knew his name a long time ago. Now that he heard the youngster's words, his hand that was twirling the poker card paused. Sounds like Sugar Daddy's personality. I think so too. Bojo turned the steering wheel. If you like it, say it. Chin Mo didn't say anything, but his smile deepened. He looked like a devil as he narrowed his eyes. Gee, what an idiot. Tell him everything. Aren't you worried that he'll drive away? With that in mind, Chin Mo glanced sideways at the youngster's face. Light seeped in, forming a halo. His skin seemed to be transparent. White and clean, even the fine hair could be seen. He knew very well how this face felt to the touch. Not only her face, but also the curve of her waist when she turned sideways. It was hard not to like the warm jade in his hand. Chinemo thought, as long as his prey can stay like this, with a pair of eyes only looking at him, he wouldn't lose interest in her in the short term. Chapter 1280. But it didn't matter. There was such an interesting prey around. He could put aside the matter of killing for now. He could wait until he couldn't take it anymore. But no matter what, he had to wash his hands clean. In front of his prey, harmlessness was the most important condition. Chinemo tilted his head. With his trench coat on, he was extremely eye-catching. He was like a walking clothes rack. With that face, he probably wouldn't be able to enter without some changes. Fortunately, Bojio had prepared many identification cards. She found one that was about the Almighty's age, and made some changes to his appearance to reduce the Almighty's presence. Bojio knew that the more confidential the mission, the more they wouldn't be investigated openly. As long as the information was completely clean and the identity matched, they could basically enter the country. That was why she had taken a detour and decided to fly back from Country T. Country T was a tourist city and had always been visa-free for Chinese. Bojio was smart. She didn't fly directly. Instead, when she reached MG Airport, she signed up for a tour group and returned to Jiang City as a member. It was originally a low-quality tour. The few girls that followed her didn't feel anything other than shopping. When they reached the airport, 2 different types of handsome guys appeared in front of them. They were all in a good mood. Look over there. Handsome men, since when did our team have these 2 weirdos? They must have just arrived. We might be able to sit together later. Bojio's arrival made the tour group livelier. Some of them looked over. The girls were still trying to guess the relationship between the 2, wondering if they could each have one. The corners of Chin Mo's mouth lifted, but he didn't say anything. He wasn't interested in the others. He just stood beside Bojio, looking harmless on the surface. He had an attractive aura. Bojio wanted to send the car back. Hence, she didn't bother about them and went to the first floor to submit the documents. Grandfather Butler was usually in charge of the overseas car entry and exit. Many people thought that Grandfather Butler was just an ordinary family doctor. In reality, that wasn't the case. It was a family of hackers. The butler of the family wasn't simple either. The old butler had a lot of channels in his hands, and every single one of them was hard to measure in terms of value. Of course, at the end of the day, it was also because of the Z codename. No one dared to offend this young master of hackers. Those who could make things convenient would usually do so. After all, anyone in the underworld would need information one day. Chin Mo watched the whole process, his eyes unsettled. After all, to him, the more complicated the identity of the prey, the more useful it would be. Brother Mo, do you want some water? Bojio was thirsty after she was done with her business. Chin Mo watched as she licked her lips, his eyes deepening. I'm indeed a little thirsty. I'll go buy it. She reached into her pocket and walked towards the vending machine. Her movements were casual, probably because of her long legs, which made her look dashing. The girl who was also waiting for the plane overheard their conversation and wanted to strike up a conversation. Handsome, I have an unopened bottle of water here. If you're thirsty, you can drink it first. Chin Mo glanced sideways, glancing at the mineral water that the girl handed over. He was about to turn her into his believer. Chapter 1281. It was easy to hint at someone. As long as he knew what the other party was thinking, it would be easy. But Chin Mo didn't want to take the bottle of water. Compared to his prey, these people looked too dirty. Had his appetite been spoiled? Chin Mo arched a brow. Just as he was about to stop, someone appeared on his shoulder. The youngster's pleasant scent wafted over. There was a smile on her face as she whispered into his left ear. I'm sorry, my boyfriend isn't used to drinking other people's food. Chin Mo didn't need to turn to know who was speaking. Except for the prey he was interested in. His current sugar daddy was an exception. No one would say such a thing. Chin Mo tilted his head and saw a beautiful side profile. She pouted her lips in his direction. She seemed to be saying, "You caused trouble." Was she jealous? Qin Mo was curious. He reached out and pinched her chin, planting a kiss on it. She had just drunk the water, and her mouth was filled with sweetness. Did you secretly eat sweets? Qin Mo asked casually. He didn't seem to have any intention of pushing the youngster off him. Instead, he smiled devilishly. My sugar daddy is really mischievous. Bojio was caught off guard by the kiss. Moreover, the two girls could hear the Almighty calling her, so she couldn't be bothered to move. She had to be direct when it came to declaring her ownership. The girl who was flirting with him was confident in her looks, which was why she acted so boldly. She hadn't expected it to be so awkward. When she had heard their conversation, she had thought they were really brothers. She hadn't thought of anything else. But now that she looked at them, they were here on vacation. If it wasn't that kind of relationship, what else could it be? The girl blushed as she took the bottle back. Bojio smiled at her. In an instant, the girl blushed again. Compared to the unapproachable man, the youngster seemed more considerate. Qin Mo noticed the commotion. His gaze deepened. When he looked at the girl again, the color in his eyes had changed. It was as dark as the night, endless. The girl shuddered. She felt as though he was going to kill her. The corners of his mouth were clearly hooked into a smile. Why did he give off such a feeling? Qin Mo didn't look at anyone. Instead, he hugged the youngster and placed her between his legs. They were both waiting for a flight, but no one sat like that. She didn't sit directly in his arms. Instead, Qin Mo sat on the chair while Bojio sat like a huge doll. She stacked on top of him and sat in the same position. However, she exerted force on the front half of the chair. It was also because the Almighty's legs were too long that most people would be able to sit like that. The people at the side widened their eyes. This was overseas and they were still so open. How could they be like this in China? Bojio also felt that they were attracting too much attention. However, the Almighty didn't change his position at all. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her waist from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. He closed his eyes, his eyelashes long like fans. I'm tired. Those 3 words successfully stopped Bojio from moving. She turned to caress the Almighty's head, his black hair slipping past her fingertips. He was just like a little princess when he was young. Bojio smiled, her heart softening. She coaxed, we're going to board the plane soon. Bear with it a little longer, MMH? All right. Qin Mo didn't loosen his grip. His handsome face was mostly buried in her shoulder, leaving only his side profile that made people want to turn back to look at him. It was indeed breathtaking. The girl at the side had never seen such a person before. When he looked at her, his malevolent aura would send chills down anyone's spine. But the next second, when he faced the youngster, his fake gentleness seemed to be able to melt everything. However, the youngster was coaxing the devilish man like a child. The girl felt her heart racing. She didn't dare to say anything else and pulled her friend away. The other onlookers, on the other hand, were all curious. After all, it was rare for a grown man to be coaxed. Qin Mo didn't care about this at all. As long as his prey was within his control, everything was fine. But he realized that he wasn't completely in control. He didn't know what it would be like when they arrived at a place she was familiar with, including the phone call she had made previously. Their mutual friend? Qin Mo arched a brow, his gaze deep. Soon, the plane started to arrange for check-in. Since it was a tour group, not many people checked. There weren't any sudden incidents on the plane. But there was one point that no one noticed. There was a gaze hidden in the crowd, filled with darkness and indignation. It was Fangjia. After she had escaped, she had thought of many ways to get a new identity. Finally, she had settled everything. When she went to look for him, there was no news at all. When she saw the video online, she suddenly remembered that he would definitely return to Jiang City, because in his subconscious mind, he wanted to return to a place he was familiar with, to crush all those who deserved to die. This was the real Qin Mo. Fangjia watched as they left, a smile forming on her face. Psychological hints wouldn't go wrong. Now that he was staying by the youngster's side, he probably didn't have any sincerity. The biggest possibility was that he treated him as prey. Her teacher had once said, as psychologists, they were the best at disguising, especially when they had ulterior motives. Now she just needed to return to Jiang City, find a way to get in touch with Qin Mo and guide him a little. Then he would truly belong to her. Because memories would change along with psychology, Fan Jia didn't feel that there was anything wrong with taking over a position that didn't belong to her. She turned and hid herself again. Now her image was everywhere. Fan Jia didn't dare to show her face, purposely making a scar on her face to buy a late-night flight. At this moment, the plane had been flying for more than 2 hours. Bo Jiu and Qin Mo sat side by side. They had booked the entire first-class cabin. Firstly, they didn't want anyone to spy on them. Secondly, before boarding the plane, Qin Mo had said that he was tired. As a domineering CEO, if he didn't show off his wealth now, when would he? Moreover, Bo Jiu's money was going to rot if she didn't spend it. She decisively became a tycoon. In the end, the person who had said that he was tired wasn't sleeping. His long legs were slightly crossed as he read a newspaper. His entire body was filled with an aura of abstinence. But at this moment, there was a hint of darkness mixed in. On the other hand, Bo Jiu tilted her head to the side, her hair falling down, revealing her true color. Silver gray? It seemed like his sugar daddy was hiding something from him. Qin Mo arched a brow, his right hand moving slightly, allowing her to lean against him. After all, he liked her body temperature. It was warm but not scalding. The stewardess, who was pushing the dining cart over, saw this scene as soon as she arrived. After lowering her voice, she asked gently, "Sir, what would you like to drink?" "It's fine, just a blanket, thank you." When Qin Mo said this, there wasn't any warmth in his eyes. It was probably because of the youngster's frown. "Okay," the stewardess replied. When she turned back, she saw him patting the person in his arms with one hand. His voice was low and slow. It was extremely melodious, as though it could easily hypnotize a craftsman. The stewardess listened in a daze, shaking her head. She had almost forgotten what she was going to do. Qin Mo looked at Bo Jiu, reaching out to pinch her face, lowering his body. "You better not look at anyone else, my sugar daddy's little prey." Bo Jiu didn't have a light sleep, probably because the clothes in her hands and the surging scent in her nose were too familiar, making her feel comfortable. Just as she was about to hit the ground, she woke up and saw his left hand playing with the poker cards. His other hand was placed on her head, stroking her hair. After seeing her open her eyes, he smiled and planted a kiss on her forehead. But vaguely, there was an indescribable danger. "This is Jiang City?" Bo Jiu followed his gaze, taking his hand over and placing it in her own. She played with it for a while before saying, "MMH, this is Jiang City, don't you like it?" "I don't dislike it." Qin Mo felt the warmth in his fingers, the light in his eyes dissipating a little. "I just can't remember how I used to live here in the past." Bo Jiu laughed. "You are very famous here. Many people like you. You have a group of brothers who are loyal to you, but you still like me the most." Qin Mo arched a brow. From a certain perspective, the prey he had his eyes on seemed to be very thick-skinned. "Oh, what else?" "What else?" Bo Jiu thought for a moment. "You have a crush on me but are too embarrassed to admit it, so you gave me a lot of books for me to comprehend on my own." "What are the books I gave you?" Qin Mo asked casually. Bo Jiu straightened her body suavely. "Overbearing CEO falls in love with me. Where are my sweetheart? There are also some books I can't remember." Qin Mo tapped the corner of her lips with his finger. "What?" Bo Jiu arched a brow. Qin Mo leaned over, kissing her lips lightly. His breath followed. "Water stain, you didn't drink obediently when I fed you water. But I'm curious, what did you comprehend from the books? Of course it's your first awakening of love." Bo Jiu wrapped her arms around his neck. When she smiled, the mole at the corner of her eyes glistened. Qin Mo's lower abdomen tightened, his gaze deepening. His fingers slid into her sweater through the blanket. When he smiled, he didn't know why, but his body temperature rose as well. Bo Jiu could feel his strength clearly. She suddenly trembled, tears welling up in her eyes. Qin Mo lowered his voice, low and sexy, right beside her ear. His breath hit her, making her arch her back. Chapter 1282. How to make your body feel happy. Bojo realized that her earlobe was being bitten lightly. That sexy voice and hot breath hit her ear, sending a numbing sensation through her. Bojo knew that the Almighty wouldn't do anything to her since they were about to alight. But the subtle teasing was unbearable, her eyes turning red. He seemed to like seeing her like this, chuckling softly beside her ear. It seems to be effective. He wanted to play with it in his palm, just like a little toy. But for some reason, when he heard the breath in his arms going wild, he actually had a reaction. This made him release his hand. But she was smiling, the corners of her lips lifting as she kissed him, like a siren in the water. It is indeed effective. Chin Mo's gaze deepened. If the broadcast hadn't interrupted his thoughts at the right time, perhaps he would reveal all of his true nature. For instance, he might have abducted her. Such a beautiful prey should be held in his arms and raised in a pampered manner. As for other things, be it a kiss or something deeper than a kiss, he should be the one to teach her. Perhaps he could plan it well. After all, he liked the way she smiled at him, the way her eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of moonlight. But similarly, he didn't like that kind of warmth, because Chin Mo knew that this person was looking at the past him. With that thought, a thin layer of coldness swept over the surging emotions in his eyes. Chin Mo laughed lightly. It would be better if we weren't on the plane. With that, his gaze landed on her neck. Then he lowered his lids, planting a kiss on it, followed by a light bite. Bojo wasn't able to reach for the vibrating phone in her pocket. She was even kneading it into a puddle. Bojo suspected that the Almighty was doing it on purpose since every time she picked up the call, he seemed a little unhappy. Even though he was smiling, no matter how she looked at him, he looked like a rich young master. But his actions were in line with the gentleness he purposely created. Come to think of it, he had been like this when they were young. Every time she went to play with other children, he would always stand by the side and smile like a prince, but it was different when he was with her. His little face was cold as he washed her hands, and he would even bite her fingers without saying why. The Almighty's personality was just that weird. Bojo was used to it. She held onto his shoulders tightly. She couldn't tell if it was ticklish or painful. She frowned slightly, her voice trembling. Gentler. When Chin Mo heard that voice, his eyes moved slightly. His gaze deepened, and even the imprint in his eyes reddened. Let me answer the phone. Bojo's breathing was unstable, the strands of sweat sticking to her flushed cheeks. Even if I don't pick up the call, we have to alight. Chin Mo was done. He pushed her hair away from her face and smiled gently. Of course I have to get off the plane. What else does my sugar daddy think I'm going to do? Bojo remained silent, waiting for the heat to dissipate. But the feeling of touch in some places had not faded. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.